Welcome, and thank you for viewing this Garden State CLE video. All Garden State CLE video programs can be seen for free 24 hours a day. Besides viewing the show, you can also earn CLE credits. In order to receive CLE credits for this program, you will have to do the following. First, download an evaluation form from the website. Just click on step number 3, and the form will appear on your screen. Please print out a copy. Next, as you watch the program, you will note that from time to time, a keyword will appear on the screen in red lettering. Write these words down on your evaluation form. Accurately recording these words is a required step in granting you CLE credits. Finally, at the conclusion of the show, simply complete the evaluation form and fax or mail it to Garden State CLE. Remember, viewing the CLE program is absolutely free. The only time you ever pay is when you want to receive CLE credits. You can pay for your CLE credits online or by sending in a check with your evaluation form. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the following Garden State CLE video from the comfort of your own home or office.
Garden State CLE. 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 Garden State CLE.
Hi everybody, I'm Jill Myra. In the years since the publication of State versus Chun, one thing has become clear to New Jersey lawyers. Success in a DWI case involving alcotest evidence requires both art and science. Simply put, the art of persuasively arguing fact and law in trial requires a solid knowledge of the science behind the alcotest. Well, the following 3-credit Garden State Continuing Legal Education program will provide you with in-depth knowledge of both the art and science of the alcotest from several of the top experts in the field. Garden State CLE instructor John Delaquillo is a former Deputy Attorney General who personally litigated State versus Chun for many months before a special master appointed by the Supreme Court. As you will see, he has extensive knowledge on both the science behind the alcotest and the development of case law that controls its use in court. Kevin Flanagan is also a Garden State CLE instructor. During his many years with the New Jersey State Police, Kevin headed the breath test unit and, before his retirement, was responsible for training thousands of police officers and state troopers on the proper operation of the alcotest. Finally, senior instructor Robert Ramsey will provide his insight into the art and science behind the alcotest litigation. He is the author of the primary text used in New Jersey DWI prosecution and defense, New Jersey Drunk Driving Law. Okay, this is going to be fun. Let's get going with our CLE. As I explained before, when it comes to trying an alcotest, you need to know both the art and the science. So let's get started with the science behind the alcotest, as explained by Kevin Flanagan.
This is the setup of the alcotest 7110, but if you were to go to a PD, it's a different configuration. It's on a tri-level stand where they have the keyboard, which is out front here, which is underneath, and then we have the alcotest. We have a CU34 simulator, which we'll talk in detail about, and then of course we have the Brother LaserDeskJet printer. I've been able to get my hands on an alcotest 7110. We have one right here. This is just the instrument itself. This is the main component. This costs about $8,000. If you were to buy this separately, the whole package costs about $12,000. The whole package. But we'll talk about the instrument, the breath hose, 46 inches long, completely heated. We'll talk about why it's heated. We'll talk about the components on the back, how everything hooks up to the instrument. If you see an error message, for an example, control gas supply error, I'll explain to you how that error message can occur and what they have to do to remedy the problem. So we're going to talk about the instrument from soup to nuts. We have many slides to go over, but this is the configuration that we had back when we started analyzing or evaluating the instrument. 7110, the simulator. It's called a simulator CU34, calibrating unit 34. Anybody know why they picked 34, the number 34? 34 degrees. Yeah, it's 34 degrees Celsius, which equates to 93.2 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the temperature of the breath as it leaves the human body, 34 degrees C or 93.2 F Fahrenheit.
What is the official name? And it's the Alcotest 7110, and then there's some letters of the alphabet.
Yeah, it's the Alcotest 7110 MK3C. The C stands for communication. When we first started evaluating this instrument, it was in 1995. That's when I came into the breath test unit in 1995. So they got 5 to 7 instruments that are on the market, and they evaluated them. And this Alcotest 7110 MK3C was brand new in 1995. Brand new. We thought we were going to be the first one in the country to go to this instrument. How long did it take to get this instrument out on the street in New Jersey? It took over 10 years. January of 2005, this instrument went out on the street in Middlesex County for the first time. So it took 10 years to get this on the street in New Jersey. The C stands for communications. The state is in the process of having a centralized database where each phone will be hooked up via a phone modem cable. Hooks up right here in the back, the phone modem cable. And that's the problem with this instrument right now. It's outdated as far as the phone modem. Remember when we first got internet? AOL, you had to hook up with the phone line, you had to dial up, and then you would lose a connection. Well, this instrument is the old technology. It has a phone modem inside. Since this instrument came out in 95, Draeger has come out with another instrument called the 9510. Same technology inside as far as breath testing, but it has new features. Touch screen, has a cable modem where you can upload and download information a lot more rapidly, more efficiently. But this one still can communicate with the centralized database that is being put together up in West Trenton.
And 1995 motherboard in there, I would imagine, too, right?
Yeah, when we first started teaching this, it sounded pretty good. This instrument's doing 128 diagnostic checks a second. 128 diagnostic checks. When I first started, I said, wow, that's pretty quick. Bob, tell him.
Well, if you still think about your own home video system, you're talking about millions and millions and millions of decisions it's making per second, and that's just to play Xbox 360, you know. So, I mean, it's very, very antiquated technology at this point, but I think we're going to be utilizing it for a while for a wide variety of reasons, not the least of which are financial. Okay, this is the basic setup, and just along the lines of communication, I know that basically it's a computer, right?
Yes.
Has a memory?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the memory and how it records transactions?
Sure. This instrument has a memory of 1,000 tests. But when I was there and Dr. Bertel was a chief forensic scientist, he stated, or he put out a memorandum that once the instrument reaches 500 tests, we want to download it. Because I don't know if it's right to say that it started slowing down, but he was afraid that they was going to lose the information inside. But that whole problem went away when Chun came out in March of 08. Because prior to March of 08, we were inspecting these instruments once a year. And that was what the manufacturer recommended. These instruments only need to be inspected once a year. And that's what we were doing. Once a year, we had 5 guys in the unit. There's 372 instruments statewide, and we had 5 people handling the instruments. And that was enough. And then when March of 08 came around, and the Supreme Court decided Chun, they changed all the rules. They stated that in Chun, this instrument must be inspected every 6 months. So we went from once a year to every 6 months. What did that do to our workload in the AD alcohol drug test unit? It doubled it. So we couldn't handle, my 5 guys couldn't handle inspecting these every 6 months. It's not feasible. They just can't do it. So we went to the colonel and said to the colonel, we need 5 new people. We need 5 more people just to inspect these instruments. And we got 5 new people at one time. First time ever in the unit's history, 5 new members at one time.
These are done by the breath test inspectors, is that correct?
They're state police. They're state police troopers, and they're assigned to our unit, and that's their whole responsibility is inspecting these units and teaching law enforcement officers.
With respect to the download of the data, I guess when they come in every 6 months, what do they do with the data that's resident inside the machine?
Sure. The instrument does have an internal memory, 1,000 tests. But when a coordinator comes in, and does a recalibration. And that's going to happen every 6 months. First thing he does, ladies and gentlemen, he hooks up to the back of this instrument right here via no modem cable. It's called a null modem cable. And what's he actually doing is transferring the data from the 7110 to his laptop. And in this area, if you're from Gloucester County, you're probably seeing Hal Wayman. He's your coordinator. Very, very dedicated, very conscientious. He does a real nice job. He's going to download that information onto his laptop. And then what he's going to do, he's going to burn 3 CDs. He's going to burn one for the police department, non-redacted. All the information's intact. Then he's going to burn another disk for the court for discovery purposes. And he's going to redact it. What do I mean by redacted? He's going to take away, I believe, 5 identifying items. Defendant's last name, first name, middle initial, date of birth, DL number, and state. 6 items. He's going to redact. So if you get a disk in discovery and you open it, there's going to be missing fields, those 6 missing fields, because they've been redacted. The way you can find your client's case is you go by the sequential file number. Every time we do something with the 7110, it gets assigned a sequential file number starting at 1 and runs to infinity, or along.
I don't think it's that high, but it's around infinity.
It's a long number, but
that's a lot of drunk drivers, you know.
It's a lot. You can identify your client by the sequential file number when you go into the data download. The data download, if you want to open it, it's easy to open with Quattro Pro. That's how I look at it. There's, how many fields, John? 270?
Like 356.
356 fields that you can look at that contain information. All that information isn't on the AIR. So it's important, it's imperative, you're going to defend your client to get that digital download.
Now, Kevin, you said there's 3. So we have one that's going to go back to the state police that's got everything. One that's going to stay resident at the police department, which contains everything. And the third one, which is redacted, which is also going to stay at the police, which I guess they'll use for the discovery.
That's correct.
So if the police department says we had a flood, we can't find your digital download anymore, you know, you can get it from the state police, right? They would always have a copy.
Yeah, the state police at Hamilton Technology Complex, they have a copy of every CD that's been ever made or burned in the state of New Jersey. The Office of Forensic Science, Dr. Baum's office, they have a copy of every disc that was burned in the state of New Jersey.
Now, we're all familiar with the routine discovery you get in every Chun case. We're all familiar with State versus Marisic, which allows us to get repair records and data downloads. But that's a legal issue. Just in terms of as a defense issue, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important would you say it is that you procure the data downloads?
If you're going to defend your client to the best of your ability, it's imperative you get that data download. And I know we have a few prosecutors in office, and you're handicapped because the inspection's only every 6 months. So if Hal Wayman comes in on September 1st, you're not going to get another inspection for 5, maybe 6 months. And my guy gets locked up September 15th. That data download is not going to occur until 5 or 5.5 months later. So you're handicapped as a prosecutor. But, you know, Bob will talk about it later about the 60-day rule. There really isn't a Bob will talk about, there really isn't a 60-day rule that you're mandated by. They're going to tell you you are, but in reality you're not. Bob will explain it to you, because these defense attorneys, they're entitled to these downloads, and I wouldn't go to court and plead somebody guilty unless you had that data download and reviewed.
I want to give you 2 fact patterns just to kind of illustrate the importance of these data downloads. And they both kind of relate to 20-minute issues, okay? Let's say that you have a guy that, you know, they're testing him, and they get an error message, mouth alcohol detected, okay?
Okay.
So far, so good?
Good.
What will the instrument do at that point when they get mouth alcohol detected?
If the instrument we'll talk about, it has a slope detector, where if the instrument detects mouth alcohol, and we'll go over how it will detect it, but it's going to abort the test. It's going to just abort the test, and it's going to print out mouth alcohol detected, test aborted.
Okay. So now at that point, they'll have to recycle the machine, and they start all over again and give the guy another series of tests, right?
Well, if they follow their training, which they should be doing, they should be waiting an additional 20 minutes.
So the bottom line is, though, the machine's going to recycle, and they start all over again, right?
There's nothing that prevents them from starting the instrument up again and entering the data.
Right. But, I mean, the instrument's going to shut itself down at this point, and they're going to have to recycle it, right?
Correct.
Okay. So if you got a successful reading the second pass through, right?
Right.
You're going to get one alcohol influence report that's going to show what happened the second time through. You wouldn't know that the first test was aborted unless you asked for the data downloads. And then you'd see all of a sudden, wait a minute, this guy, he aborted it at 8 o'clock, and at 8:03, He's giving the guy a test again after the instrument aborted because it said he had mouth alcohol. Great?
Agree.
So you would pick up the time of when the first test aborted from the data download.
Yes.
You agree?
Yes, because when I review a lot of data downloads, and they stick out like a sore thumb because you'll see the same information on two different lines. Right. And, you know, the same arresting officer, same time, everything's identical. And then I'll go across and see what the problem was and why they ran another test.
Just to illustrate the importance of this, because you would never know. Your client's not going to tell you that the test was aborted and they had to do that. First of all, he's drunk. And second of all, he wouldn't. Did I mention that he was drunk? And that's number one. And number two, they're not sensitized to this. Now, I'll give you another example where this would come up, okay? Let's say they're doing their thing and they get to the end and they get a control test failure. All right? Mm-hmm. They're out of business, right?
Yeah, the instrument, we'll talk about it. If the instrument has a control test failure, the instrument's shut down until the solution is changed again by the police department.
All right, so let's say it happens in West Deptford, all right? So now they got to take the guy, put him in a car. They're going to drive him over to someplace, Woodbury, all right? Mm-hmm. He's going to take a test at Woodbury. Well, they take him to Woodbury, and he gives a successful test at Woodbury, and you get all the information, right? Mm-hmm. You're not going to get an AIR from the police showing that they had a control test failure at the end, okay? So how are you going to know that the cops actually waited 20 minutes the second time they took him over to Woodbury? You'll know from the data download, you know, the time the last test ended, when they tried to give him the test. You'll be able to see whether or not it was possible that they could have gotten him to Woodbury, waited, and observed him for 20 minutes again. You agree?
Well, the key there would be that he got arrested in West Deptford, and then you got an AIR from Woodbury. That should raise a red flag or a white flag. What happened? Why wasn't he tested in West Deptford? And then you do some investigating. You'll say, well, they had a control test failure. They had to take him over. And 99% of the time, it's going to be in the police report. They're going to say, we had to, handcuff Flanagan, transport him to Woodbury to run additional breath tests. They're not going to hide that.
They're never going to hide it. But my point is, though, that the data download from the West Deptford machine, it's really not relevant because they didn't get a good reading, but it'll tell you the time that they finished up. And now you can be able to figure out whether or not they waited 20 minutes when they got him over to the other place to give him another test, okay? So the point I'm trying to make here is that there are numerous decision points and defenses that come out of these data downloads, and it's really not a function of what the guy's BAC was. That's not really what it's all about. It deals with other issues associated with the case. I'm just kind of giving you some routine examples to think about so you understand and appreciate the importance of ordering these data downloads, because they can be just an indispensable component of defending these cases. Okay, so we have the instrument itself, we have the CU34, and I want everybody, by the way, to utilize the jargon, okay? So when we say simulator, we say CU34. We're talking about this thing right here. Now, I want to get into this simulator. There's another shot at it. And just, what are these wires coming out of here, by the way, Kevin? Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. This is called a neoprene hose, ladies and gentlemen. It's about 1.25 inches long, and it connects the simulator to the alco test. And it's only 1.5 inches long because, well, here's where it hooks up to. This leads right to the cuvette or the IR chamber. It's 1.5 inches long because they didn't want to lose concentration of the vapor as it's being transferred from the instrument, from the CU34 into the instrument. So it's very short hose that connects the simulator to the instrument. The other hose on top, this is about a 20-inch plastic hose. This leads to the pump inside the instrument. When the instrument wants to see a sample, it pumps air into the simulator, bubbling up and creating that vapor being forced into the instrument. Then the instrument will analyze that vapor.
I see that you have an off and on switch. You ever have a defendant who shut this off when the cops weren't looking?
We had an incident in Camden County. The guy got locked up in a Camden County PD. I'm not going to say the PD, but he got locked up in Camden County. And he's sitting next to the instrument. And I guess the officers turned their back or weren't paying attention. He reached behind the 7110 and turned the simulator off. Now, this guy had to be coached to do that. Nobody else would know except law enforcement. We know the on-off button. The simulator was turned off. It lost power, it lost temperature, and it rendered the instrument inoperable. Simulator temperature error came up on the screen, and the instrument's rendered inoperable. You can't use it. So they handcuffed them, took them to Runnymede. They ran the test, and then everything was okay.
Did they stop at the Philly Diner on the way over?
I think they did.
All right. Now, I see this is plugged into the wall. Does this thing ever get turned off, or is it on all the time?
No, the simulator stays on 24/7, as does the instrument. The instrument's like your computer at home. If you don't pay attention to it, it will go into the sleep mode, standby mode. But that simulator is constantly heating up and cooling down to a temperature of 34 degrees Celsius plus or minus 0.2 degrees Celsius. So 33.8 to 34.2 is a very tight temperature tolerance that's acceptable within a simulator solution.
But it can't do anything until it reaches at least 33.8, right?
Correct.
Now, can you see the temperature probe on here at all? Can you see the thermometer?
Well, you can see the cord here. This goes to the temperature probe, which gets inserted into the simulator. And what the temperature probe is doing, ladies and gentlemen, it's just telling the instrument the temperature of the simulator solution. There's two types of temperature probe. There's a black key temperature probe that the coordinators carry with them, and there's a regular temperature probe that the police departments have. They look identical. The difference is between the black key and the regular key is that the coordinators have a lot deeper access they can gain into the instrument. They can change the tolerances. They can change the date. They can change a lot of different features inside the instrument. The normal temperature probe that the PD have, they only allow them to do a solution change, get reports out of the instrument, and it tells the instrument the temperature of the solution. So it's very limited that the access that the PDs have.
All right. Now, here's a better picture of it. And I want to just kind of talk about this for a couple seconds, okay? We call it a simulator. Why is it called a simulator? Because it is simulating what a human being who had a blood alcohol level of 0.10 would be, okay? If I had a 0.10 BAC and I blew a sample of ethanol, molecules of ethanol from my lungs into the instrument, it would test it and come back with a 0.10 BAC. This instrument here, this part of the device, the CU34, the simulator, is going to simulate a live human being who would have a level of BAC in his body of 0.10. And the reason they utilize that is for this concept called bracketing, all right? Now, just to kind of set the stage here, in the old days, when we had breathalyzer, we used to bracket machines, okay? And can you talk a little bit about bracketing for a second, Kevin, just
Sure.
in the sense of how we did it with the breathalyzer?
Sure. I was a breathalyzer coordinator back in 95, 2000. The way we did it back with the breathalyzer, if I came into West Deptford on September 1st, then I came back October 1st, and I found that the instrument was in proper working order. I did an inspection. I didn't find any problems. The instrument was in proper working order. The court could assume that between September 1st and October 1st, anybody that got locked up and was put on that breathalyzer, the instrument was in proper working order because of the before and after cert.
So it's inferential, it's circumstantial evidence, basically. The inference is that since it was working okay 60 days ago and it was working okay yesterday, that all of the tests that took place within that bracketing between the before test and the after test were probably okay. That's the inference, okay?
Correct.
Right? So how is this different?
The new technology, the 7110, Alcotest 7110, we've got that bracketing down to every single drunk driver. So what happens? I get arrested for drunk driving. I'm taken to the PD. They're going to run me on the Alcotest. Before I provide samples of my breath, the instrument's going to do a control test before I blow in. So we do a control test first. There's certain tolerances we have to be acceptable for the control test. A 0.095 to a 0.105, anywhere within that range, it's showing that the instrument's working properly. Then I'm going to provide samples of my breath. The instrument's going to allow the operator 11 attempts. 11 attempts at getting 2 good samples, 2 valid samples. They don't have to be consecutive. They just have to be 2 good samples within 11 attempts. At the end of the second valid breath sample, the instrument's going to do another control test. So here we did a control test before I started blowing, and then when I finished blowing or provided 2 valid samples, the instrument's going to do another control test. So now we got the bracketing down to every single drunk driver that provide their breath into the 7110.
And that's what the simulator does. It's simulating some drunken guy on the street who has a controlled BAC that we know is a 0.10. So let's just look at the of what's going in here. Remember now that the instrument is measuring gas, just like you're measuring the gas out of the lungs. It's measuring gas as well. There is a fluid in here. This is precisely 500 milliliters. You know how I know that? Because that's the bottle that it came in. And how many milliliters are in this bottle?
Yeah, this is the cash cow. Draeger made some money selling these instruments, but they're not selling many instruments anymore. This simulator solution is good for 25 test sequences or 30 days. So every 30 days, whether you run 1 drunk or you run 25 drunk drivers, that solution has to be changed.
It looks,
$7.50.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. First of all, it's expensive, right?
$7.50 or $8 a bottle.
You realize it's more expensive than a 6-pack of Old Milwaukee. not that but I digress. What goes into
How would
the,
you lower yourself, though, Milwaukee?
Hey, listen, business is not good these days. What is the solution? What's in here?
Yeah, this solution is 500 milliliters of ethyl alcohol and water mixed to a concentration, liquid concentration of a 0.12.
Okay. And we know that because we're going to get a report from the New Jersey State Police Forensic Laboratories that says that they tested on a random basis samples of the lot that this solution came in, all these bottles here, and they found that it was within the right range, right?
Correct.
So what is the ideal mixture that you should have for this? I mean, if it was really spot on correct, what would it be?
Spot on. In science, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not a scientist, I've been taught, but there's tolerances in everything. In this simulator solution, remember I said a 0.12 liquid equals a 0.10 vapor? Well, the tolerance of the simulator solution is a 0.117 to a 0.125. So we got a tolerance, 117 to a 0.125 to get a perfect, which is a perfect 1.0 vapor. A 121 would equal a perfect 1.0 vapor.
So let's say that this liquid, this 500 milliliters of alcohol and water, has precisely 0.121 in it. Okay.
Okay.
Now, what you're telling me is that if we take this liquid and we heat it to 34 degrees, and then we create a gas in the headspace here, which is nothing more than the space between the liquid and the top of the container. If we test the gas that's in here, that gas should be a 0.10 BAC. The molecules of ethanol in here that you're creating should test out as 0.10. Do you agree with that?
I do agree.
Or is that a
with
pack of lies?
No, that's 100% true.
All right. Now, a couple of technical things. I say that this has to be to 34 degrees. Could you talk a little bit about the how it gets to 34 degrees and the time associated with it, and to make sure that it's all uniformly that temperature?
Sure. 500 milliliters has to be heated to 34 degrees plus or minus 0.2 degrees. So if a solution change needs to be conducted at the PD, it's going to take about an hour and 15 to an hour and a half to conduct. So that's why Bob said if the instrument goes down because of a control test failure, they're not going to call somebody in, because when I was training the police chiefs or the prosecutors or the directors, we recommended, John and myself recommended, that only 2 or 3 people at a PD be authorized to change the solution. If you hold an Alcotest certification card, you're certified to change the solution. But a Department of Camden City, who has over 500 police officers, you don't want all 500 changing the solution. You want 2 or 3, maybe in a big department like that, maybe 5 guys who are very meticulous to detail to change that solution, because it has to be done the same way every time they change the solution. If you don't do it right, you're going to get an error message, and the more error message you get, the reliability instrument gets called into question.
How long typically, though, does it take to heat this up to 34 degrees?
Once that's plugged in, it'll take approximately 10 minutes to heat up to temperature 33.8. But what they found,
which would be the minimum temperature it needs,
which is the bottom tolerance, 33.8. But what they found, ladies and gentlemen, this solution heats up very quickly, about 10 minutes. So they ran a test, and they found out that when the vapor went through the headspace and through the metal components of the simulator, it was cooling down the vapor, because that wasn't good and heated yet. That wasn't heated up properly. So they were getting bad control tests. And they figured, they called the engineers at Draeger and said, it's heated up to 33.8. We're running the test, but we're getting bad results. Why? And Draeger came up with the solution. This wasn't heated properly.
No pun intended now.
Solution? Okay.
Sorry.
This wasn't heated up properly, and all the metal components on the top of the simulator, because the vapor has to travel through these components before it gets into the instrument. So Draeger said, let it heat for 20 minutes. So once that comes up to 33.8, which takes about 10 minutes, then let it heat for an additional 20 minutes. You should be okay. But Dr. Bertel, who was the director of the Forensic Science Bureau, said, we're not going to wait 20 minutes in New Jersey. We're not going to wait 40. We're going to wait 60 minutes. And that's called a simulator equilibration timer. So the instrument turns on. The warm-up period takes about 10 minutes. It heats up to 33.8. Then the timer kicks over to a simulator equilibration timer set at 60 minutes. Now that solution is going to cook for 60 minutes before we run a test. We know after 60 minutes, everything's good and heated. So we're going to get proper results when we do our test.
Kevin, is there anything inside the instrument that keeps the solution moving so that you don't get more temperature on one side than the other?
Yes. Over here, ladies and gentlemen, is called the heating stick. And we have a paddle in here. It's like a baffle or an agitator. It circulates the solution. It's not keeping it's not keeping the solution mixed, the alcohol and the water. It's not keeping that mixed together. It's keeping the solution circulating inside the jar. If we didn't circulate the solution, this side of the jar would be hotter than this side of the jar because the heating sticks over here. We wouldn't get accurate results because the temperature would fluctuate. So they circulate the solution in there. There's a paddle or an agitator that keeps it circulating to keep the solution heated evenly.
Now,
that stays on 24/7.
I was just going to ask you about that because of the necessity of this being within that tolerance of 34 degrees plus or minus 0.2 degree. I would imagine there's like a thermostat or something in here, right? That keeps it at that temperature.
There's a thermostat, and it's set at 34 degrees. So when the solution hits 34 degrees, it turns off. Then it drops. It cools down to say 33.9, 33.9 something. The thermostat kicks on. It's like your heater at home. If you have it set at 70. When it's 72 degrees in the house, it won't come on, but when it's 68 degrees, the heat kicks on. And that's what's happening here. The thermostat is set at 34 degrees. When it cools down to 85, the thermostat kicks on, and it keeps it within that range of 34 degrees.
So this is why the cops arrest somebody at 9 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't matter. The instrument should be ready to roll all the time, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, the simulator's ready to roll. The only thing that's going to happen, they're going to need to warm up the ALCO test, and that might take 7-8 minutes to warm up. It actually beeps, beep, beep, and it says ready. And then they know they can begin their breath test.
All right. Now, you alluded to something before which is vitally important, and I want to talk about it, okay?
Okay.
Kevin indicated that the solution, this right here, that got dumped in here, we know there was precisely 500 milliliters because that's all there is in this bottle, has a very short lifespan, okay? There are 4 occasions that I can think of. If you can think of any more, let me know, okay? But off the top of my head, there are 4 occasions when this solution has to be changed. And I want to go through each one of them with you because you're going to see how this relates to the core foundational documents. The first is just pure passage of time, okay? Every 30 days it has to be changed. Now, we're dealing with a computer, albeit a 1995 computer, but still it's a computer. It knows the day of the week, it knows the year, it knows the time. It is keeping track of how long has gone by since the last time the solution got changed. So typically what's going to happen, they will arrest your idiot, bring him in at, they arrest your guy at 11:30, bring him in. They bring him in at 12:15 or whatever. He gets in. They want to put him on the instrument. Instrument says, sorry, can't run any tests. It's after midnight. It's been more than 30 days. I need a solution change. Okay? Right?
Correct.
Okay. Everybody got that? Just the mere passage of time. Number 2. The number of drunk drivers involved, okay? Now, this is what I'm telling you is not technically correct scientifically, but it's just the easiest way to understand this initially. Then we'll get into the technical reason. The instrument will allow you to test 25 drunk drivers. After the 25th drunk driver, it's going to need a solution change. Now, just real quick, Kevin, the passage of time in these 25 drunk drivers, what's happening to the strength of the solution? I mean, is it getting weaker or stronger? What's happening to it?
Yeah, the solution's going to deplete just over time. You think about it's heating up to 34. That's 93.2 Fahrenheit. That's hot. That's pretty warm. So it's just going to deplete over time. And that's why they set a limit at 25 tests or 30 days, whichever comes first. The solution has to be changed because of depletion.
All right, everybody got that? So, again, they've arrested your guy at 11:30 at night. They bring him in. They're going to test him. The instrument says, sorry, I just had my 25th drunk driver. He's number 26. I can't do anything. I need a solution change, all right? Now, when the instrument needs a solution change, either because of the passage of time or because this is the 26th drunk driver they brought in, the instrument's shut down. There's just nothing they can do about it. Nothing can happen until the solution in this CU34 has been changed. Third situation, again, that's just off the top of my head, is if they're testing someone and they get what's called a control test failure. Remember the bracketing we talked about a few minutes ago? Well, Kevin indicated that there is a range that's allowable for the instrument. I told you that if you had a 0.121 fluid in here, okay, at 34 degrees, this ideally will produce a gas that will come back as 0.10, all right? But there's tolerances to the instrument. It doesn't have to be necessarily 0.10. The instrument will work as long as it's within a range of no less than 0.095 and no greater than 0.105. As long as the test comes back within that range, that's perfectly cool, okay? No problem there. However, every once in a while they're testing a guy and the instrument says, oh, wait a minute, I'm out of range. I'm a 0.094. not a .095. The control test here is evidence that this has depleted beyond the tolerance level that's allowed. Okay, at that point, instrument shuts itself off. It says, "Sorry, you're out of business with me. Not until I get another control test." Do you agree with that?
I do.
Okay. Now, the fourth time that I can think of when they have to change the solution is during routine maintenance of the instrument every 6 months, when the state police come in to perform their calibration of the instrument. Okay, Kevin indicated to you previously that before this used to be done every year. That was the protocol for the state police. The Supreme Court in Chun directed that it be done every 6 months. This doubled the size of your unit. Did you get a raise, by the way?
Did I get a raise?
Yeah.
I might have got promoted.
Yeah, but twice as much work, all these guys you got to supervise. So one of the things that the trooper will do, in fact, the very last thing that the breath test coordinator will do before he walks out of the building after he's calibrated the instrument, is he'll put new solution in the instrument and say to the police, "Hey, cops, you're good for the next 30 days or 25 drunk drivers, whichever occurs first. I'll see you. Thanks for playing." Okay? So those are 4 times that I can think of. Can you think of any other time when they would, either as a matter of routine or something of that nature, where they change solution?
The only other time if the simulator is going to expire, because the simulator and the probe have to be calibrated every year still. Once a year, they got to go back to Draeger in Texas and get recalibrated. Every department, I'm pretty sure, has 2 simulators and 2 probes. So the only one that can really swap out the simulator and probe is the breath test coordinator. Why do I say that? Each of these temperature probes, which this is the temperature probe here, and it's connected to the instrument, has a probe value. You'll see that on the certificate of accuracy. It'll have a probe value of 101, 102. That has to be set inside the instrument. And the only one that can set that probe value is the breath test coordinator, because that's a black key function. So the breath test coordinator is the only one that would change the sim and probe out. When they did that, they would change the solution also.
Got it. But that's not something that's going to happen every 5 minutes. The main reasons that you're going to see simulator solution changes are the 4 that I've just told you about, okay? Passage of time, number of drunk drivers, control test failure, and then just as a matter of routine every 6 months when the breath test coordinator comes in. Now, I want to talk about the first of these 3 because these you're going to see on a very, very routine basis, and they play into the core foundational documents. Kevin pointed out before that anyone who is eligible to, has been trained and is licensed to operate an alcotest is legally capable of going in and changing solution. Okay, but that's you got some quality control issues associated with this. I mean, from a defense attorney standpoint, if they let every officer in Camden change the solution, that would actually be pretty good. But somebody thought better of it. All right, so the SOP adopted by John and by Kevin around the state is that the chief will select specific officers who will be tasked with the responsibility of swapping out the solution. Okay, guys who are they just know how to pay attention to detail. They're meticulous and responsible, which is good. By the way, going to open up all kinds of opportunities for everybody, as you'll see momentarily. Now, let's go back to our situation. They arrested your guy at 11:15. They get him back there at 12:30. They're ready to test him, and they can't do it because the instrument needs a solution change. All right? Well, you got Plan A and you got Plan B. Plan A is you pick up the phone and you call the guy who's responsible for changing out the solution and say, "Oh, I'm sorry to wake you up. Listen, get dressed, come on over here, and swap out the solution." Right? Now, over to beyond the the payroll issue, paying somebody overtime to do that, there's some other issues going on here too. Like, how much time are we talking about, assuming the guy lives relatively close?
Once he gets to the PD, it's going to take him about 1 hour and 15 to 1 hour and a half to change the solution, because he's locked out for at least an hour because of that simulator equilibration timer. So you're looking at 1 hour and 15 to 1 hour and a half. Okay.
Now, John Delaquillo, I want to ask you a police question, all right? What is the rush with the police? Why do they feel that they've got to get the fastest breath test done? You know what I'm saying? Why do they have that philosophy?
Well, it's because of the...
is there an award for the fastest breath test?
Steve Monson, the trophy that's given at the end of the year for the fastest breath test. Really, there's a misunderstanding by most police that they have to get breath samples right away. And the reason they feel that way is they've been taught that every second that the defendant's there, the alcohol is dissipating from their body, which of course it is. but not that great a rate. So their fear is that if they wait 30 seconds too long or a minute too long, they're going to lose. The defendant's going to go from a 2-0 down to an 0-8, because they've waited 30 seconds, and we all know that's not the case. So they tend to rush through it. And when we're teaching the police, I use that line all the time. There's no trophies, there's no award at the end of the year for the fastest breath test, but nonetheless, they like to rush through. They always wait exactly 20 minutes, and they got to jump on it.
Now, there's a psychological thing here I want to ask you about, John, in about 1 second, but let me just kind of set things up here, all right? So the guy's sitting there. I mean, you could do plan A and call this guy in. You're willing to pay him the overtime, but for the time getting there, plus the time he's going to go through this, you've got maybe 2 hours where the guy's just kind of sitting there, and with every beat of his heart, and every breath that he takes, he's purging out the alcohol's being processed out of his system. If he's like a normal human being, he's going to dissipate the alcohol at 0.015% per hour. Is it going to make a difference in his BAC at some point? I don't know, but I mean, it's the type of evidence you really do want to get as quickly as possible. Then you also run into issues as to whether or not the test, if and when it gets administered, was administered within a reasonable period of time. So it seems to me that the SOP, and I don't know if you guys were responsible for this at all, but the SOP around the state seems to be that when there's a control test failure or some problem with administering the test, maybe something stupid like they ran out of mouthpieces or something, they take him from the department where he was arrested to a neighboring department. Now, is that something you guys was that part of your idea, or is this just the police are doing this on their own?
No, that was really the protocol that was established. It's not a hard and fast rule. They could keep the person there and change the solution, do whatever needs to be done. But the thinking was that you didn't want to waste a lot of time trying to diagnose a problem, remedy the problem, and then do your breath test. It was a lot easier. I know I deal with prosecutors. You dealt with prosecutors from other states like Texas. It's not practical there to take somebody, because in Texas the nearest other police station might be hours away.
Psychologically, what is it like for a regular police officer to walk into a foreign department with a foreign sergeant and your guy to give him a breath test? What's that like?
It's stressful because we all like to play on a home turf. We all like our home stadium. When a police officer goes to another town, first of all, they're dealing with people that they may not deal with all the time. They don't know where things are. They're out of their domain. They're out of their element, and they tend to get frustrated and a little bit nervous. They also will have a sergeant or a lieutenant from the other police department kind of watching them while they're doing things, and you get nervous when somebody's watching what you do. You don't want to screw up. You don't want to look like so they tend to make more mistakes when they do that because they are not familiar. They're in unfamiliar territory, and they tend to get frustrated more because they're trying to do everything perfect. They get out of their zone. They get out of their routine, and it becomes more difficult. So
now the question for both of you is the official training for these guys when they take somebody from Department A to Department B to do a 20-minute observation deprivation period before they give them the test at the second PD?
Absolutely. If they're going to revert to their training, they're trained that once they get to the second location, they got to start that 20-minute observation all over again.
Right. Now, I'm going to tell all of you, and this is why you've got to watch these data downloads, it's psychologically they want to get out of there as quickly as possible. It is not unusual at all that they'll get to the second police department and not go through the 20-minute observation period. And by the way, it may not be, and I know this sounds apocryphal, but it's true. It happens all the time. You've all seen it. It's not 2 departments. It's 3 departments or 4 departments they have to take them to. Why? They take them to the second department, control test failure. Take them to the third department, no mouthpieces. It's not until they get to the 4th department that they finally wind up getting a good test. Think about the legal issues you have in play when you've been taken around the county in this way, in the sense of whether or not the test was administered within a reasonable period of time. You have the 20-minute issues each time that you go through this. Many, many times you see refusals in these situations too, where the defendants are just so frustrated and angry. I mean, they want to go to the bathroom and they haven't been able to do that. So lots of times to rebel, they rebel in the only way that they can, which is it doesn't really help them that much, I don't think, unless they're third offenders, by refusing to take the breath test. So I mean, these are all common issues. But what I'm suggesting to all of you is that if you see an alcohol influence report coming in from a department other than where your guy was arrested, you got to start asking a lot of questions, not the least of which is, did they wait 20 minutes when they took him to the second department? Okay, and start checking what happened in the first department where they were to see whether or not they actually, they stopped here and 14 minutes later they're putting him on the box in the second department. So For bracketing purposes, we're going to heat this to 34 degrees, which it should already be. It's going to generate a vapor here. Vapor gets sucked into the instrument, and if everything's working okay, that vapor ideally would be 0.10. However, it could be as strong as 0.105. It could be as weak as 0.095, and it would still be acceptable. Oh, let's just take 2 seconds to explain to everybody what this mess is here.
I'm sure everyone in the room has heard about the digital NIST thermometer or the Erco heart thermometer.
This is the State versus Holland, State versus Pizzo controversy that was decided by the appellate division.
What we have here, ladies and gentlemen, this is an Erco heart digital NIST thermometer. And during the calibration process, each coordinator has a digital NIST thermometer. Back when we started the program, they must have had a lot of money from grants because this is the Cadillac of digital NIST thermometers. If somebody asks you, what kind of car would you like to drive? What would you say? 750 BMW, A8, Audi A8? That's what I would pick, one of those, right? Well, the state picked this Erco Heart digital NIST thermometer. This is the Cadillac of digital NIST. About $1,200, $1,500 to buy each individual thermometer. To get them calibrated, it was costing me like $500 to get them recalibrated. And what it does, ladies and gentlemen, each coordinator has their own. When they come in and do a calibration, they have 4 simulators set up on the table. 4 simulators. The state police coordinator will bring 3 simulators of his own. He'll have the department simulator. Once they're all heated up for over an hour, he actually gets his digital NIST thermometer and he's NISTing each simulator. And what he's doing, ladies and gentlemen, he's checking each simulator to make sure it's heating up to 34 degrees. Because if he had to come into court and testify, the first question that a defense attorney would say is, Trooper, how do you know your simulators were heating up properly? Well, I have the black heat temperature probe that has a certificate of accuracy. The instrument's been... No. Dr. Bertel wanted them to be able to testify. I used an external device, which is separate from everything else. It's separate to test this temperature of each simulator. It got too expensive to get these calibrated. $500. Every year I was spending $500, and I had 12 of them. So we decided, the state decided, let's go to another digital NIST thermometer. And we did. We went to a portable one called Control Company Digital NIST. The guys like this a lot better. It runs on batteries. It's very portable. They don't need to find a plug. And all they do, they turn it on, and here's the probe that they dip in each simulator. When they pull it out, they dry it off, stick it in the next one, and they use it for about 60 seconds. At best, 60 seconds during the whole calibration process that takes about 4 hours. Big to do about changing digital NIST thermometer. Big court decision, State v. Holland. I don't know how many cases were challenged because of this issue. And I was still employed with the state. And I said, what are they challenging? It has nothing to do with the instrument, nothing to do with the breath temperature results, nothing. It's just checking the temperature of each simulator prior to being used for the calibration.
Let's just talk philosophically for a second about the Alcotest. The idea behind the Alcotest, to begin with, is that you have a sample of breath being tested by a human being, from a human being, or from a simulator, doesn't matter. That's going to be tested by 2 independent types of technology that theoretically have nothing to do with each other. So if you take a sample of breath from a human being, it goes into the instrument's going to test it utilizing 2 separate, unrelated types of technology. And there'll be results from each one of those 2 technologies. Then the instrument will compare the results from those 2 technologies. If they're within a certain range of each other, the inference is that they got a correct BAC reading. What is the range that has to be with these 2 technologies? How close do they have to be?
Between the IR, which is infrared, and between the EC, which is electrochemical, the results have to be within a 0.008 or 10%. It's not plus or minus. It's just 0.008 or 10%, whichever is greater.
Got it. Now, the 2 technologies are infrared, IR, and the other one is EC. And I want to talk about each one of these individually. Now, Kevin, you used the word cuvette before. This is, in fact, the cuvette here. Can you explain to everybody what's happening inside the cuvette during the testing phase?
Sure. This is our cuvette. It's solid polished brass, very expensive. If this goes down and breaks, this is $4,000 to replace. Ladies and gentlemen, this cuvette, or sample chamber, cuvette is a French word for sample chamber, is about 2¼ inches long. 2¼ inches long. So it's not very long. Our cuvette here has a maximum capacity of 70 milliliters. So what happens? The instrument says, please blow /R. It's time to collect the sample. So on the screen here, it'll say, please blow /R. The police officer is supposed to read specific verbiage. It's posted over every PD in the state of New Jersey. I want you to take a deep breath, blow into the mouthpiece with one long continuous breath, continue to blow until I tell you to stop. Do you understand? The defendant starts blowing, asterisks are going to be lit up across the screen. Asterisks. And that indicates that the operator, that the defendant's blowing. Because you could take the mouthpiece and just pretend you're blowing. No asterisks, they're playing games with you. You see asterisks, they're blowing air into the instrument. 10 asterisks equates to 1.5 liters of air. And that's the minimum volume we have to receive in order for this instrument to analyze the sample. 1.5 liters of air. So the air is being blown into the breath hose. It travels through this port here, and this is the flow sensor measuring the flow rate of air. Once the sample laden with ethanol molecules enters into the cuvette, the IR emitter is activated. You got to remember, IR is energy. Ethanol molecules absorb IR energy. And that's how this works. This instrument will send out a beam. Now the beam has to make 6 reflections or 7 pass inside that chamber because we need a specific distance to allow the energy to be absorbed by the ethanol molecules. If we had 6 reflections or 7 passes, the distance is about 15.5 inches, roughly. But how much would that cost to have a cuvette 15.5 inches long, solid polished brass? Very expensive. So the engineers in Germany for Draeger said, let's curve the mirrors here. They're called parabolic mirrors. They're curved or rounded to reflect energy. So the IR energy is dispersed. It makes 6 reflections, 7 passes, letting the ethanol molecules absorb the energy, and then we get our results back here at the detector. So what happens, real basically, ladies and gentlemen, we send out 100 units of energy. The ethanol molecules absorb 10 units. So back here at our detector, we sent out 100, we only receive back 90. 10 units were absorbed by the ethanol molecules, that might be an 0.5 reading. If we send out 100, we have a higher concentration of ethanol molecules. Now instead of receiving 90, say we receive 70. Higher concentration of molecules, ethanol molecules, more absorption, higher reading, a 0.15 reading.
This infrared at the 9.5 micron level, this is really nothing more than light. It's just light at the end of the spectrum. That's the infrared spectrum, right? So, I mean, it's literally moving at the speed of light because it is light, okay? I like to think about it like you're out in the Delaware Bay, morning, about 9 o'clock. You're drunk already, of course, and fishing. And you can see the lighthouse at East Point, lighthouse down in Cumberland County. And, you're fishing, you see the lighthouse. Then all of a sudden, like, the fog starts coming in, and it gets more and more difficult to see the light coming from the lighthouse. So eventually you get enough fog you can't see it at all. The light coming to you, it's certainly not on the 9.5 micron range, but the visible light coming to you is being diffused by the fog. Same principle. The more fog, the less light you're going to get, okay? The more molecules of ethanol inside of this chamber, the more the energy is going to be absorbed, and the less will get over to the IR detector on the other side. There's a formula. It knows that if you're sending out 100 all the time and you get back X, which is less at the other side, the inference is that it was absorbed by the molecules of ethanol inside of the chamber. Now, it's important you understand that Kevin was talking to you about the molecules of ethanol in the chamber coming from a human subject, all right? And that's perfectly fine. But remember, we're also bracketing here utilizing the simulator. So there'll be molecules of ethanol introduced into the chamber from the simulator when you're going through to test whether or not the instrument's actually working, right?
Correct.
Where do those molecules of ethanol come from?
From the simulator?
Yeah. How do they come in from the simulator?
The simulator is connected here via that neoprene hose, that 1.5 or 1.25 neoprene hose. When the instrument wants a sample for the control test, it's programmed in the firmware. The pump will kick on, pumps air into the simulator, then the sample is drawn in, ethanol molecules, the light, and we know the reading because it's been tested by the State Police Lab. It's a 1.0. If we receive a 1.2 reading, the instrument's not working properly, the tests aren't accurate and reliable. And that's how it works with the bracketing.
Now, one of the things happens between each test, whether the sample's coming into the chamber here through a human being or the top through a simulator is that between each test, all the molecules of ethanol inside of this chamber are blown out. There's room air that comes and actually purges the instrument out. So there's no contaminating molecules of ethanol left in here before a new sample goes in, either from the human subject or from the simulator. So typically, for example, when you start off, again in bracketing, you're going to want to take a sample from the simulator to make sure that the instrument's working right and recognizes what a 0.10 is or whether it's within the right tolerance. Assuming that it is, the next thing that happens is the instrument will blow out, utilizing room air, all the molecules of ethanol that came in from the simulator. The next molecules will come in from the human subject, right in through here, right? Test it, see what his BAC was, blow them out. He takes a second sample, puts it in here, tests it. Then the instrument blows it out so there are no molecules left inside. Second simulator test at the end to make sure it's still working okay. Kind of easy. Everybody got that? That's the procedure. Now you're going to see how this ties in to the core foundational documents that we're dealing with this.
Real quick, Bob. This cuvette has a maximum capacity 70 milliliters. It's a free-flowing system. First air in, first air out. This is a flapper valve there. It's called the outlet port. It's a flapper valve, and it's right here, ladies and gentlemen. It's a one-way check valve. As the defendant is providing a sample, it's creating pressure, the valve opens up, lets the sample out. When the pressure stops, the valve shuts, trapping in the sample. And it's a free-flowing system. We need minimum 1.5 liters of air, but that capacity is only 70 milliliters inside that cuvette. So it's a free-flowing system, unlike the breathalyzer.
We're going to come back to that in about 3 seconds. I just want to ask you real fast about the electrochemical testing. How is it that the same molecules of ethanol that are in here that are being tested by infrared is also tested by electrochemical? How does that work physically?
Well, once the IR is done being analyzed, it has a slope detector where it has, we'll talk about this later, reached IR absorption plateau. Then the IR is done analyzing the sample. The defendant stopped blowing. The flapper valve shuts. The sample is trapped inside there. The fuel cell piggybacks the cuvette, sits on top. And here's the port that leads to the EC sensor, which is electrochemical. When the IR is done, the fuel cell draws off 1 cubic centimeter, 1 cc of air. Actually sucks it out, draws it out. And it analyzes 1 cc of the same breath that the IR just got done analyzing. So that's how we have our dual technology. One sample, but we're getting 2 independent methodologies, IR and fuel cell, analyzing the same breath sample almost simultaneously.
How does the electrochemical part of it work? I mean, just very, very basically, how does it tell what the BAC is based upon electrochemical testing?
It's like a battery, and it's measuring a current change between when it's not seeing a sample of alcohol. When it sees a sample of alcohol, it measures the current, and it just measures the change between the 2 currents. And it's like a formula with the IR. It knows that if it sees so much of a change, it's a certain reading. All right.
Same sample of ethanol molecules being tested with 2 independent technologies, and there's 2 sources for those molecules, either from the human being or from the simulator.
Correct.
So far, so good?
Good.
All right. Now, there are 4 criteria that are necessary in order to get a valid sample, and I want to go through them. And just by way of introduction, we are a blood state. New Jersey, it's blood alcohol state. All right. Well, it's just not practical to be taking arterial blood samples from human beings. The best you're going to get is a venous blood sample. So the best substitute for the arterial blood supply is the blood supply that's related to the lowest part of the lungs. Okay, because the air that's coming out of the lowest part of the lungs is the one that's physically closest to the arterial blood supply. So the idea is that what the instrument wants to test is the molecules of ethanol that are in the deepest, lowest part of the lung. Why? Because it's the closest to the arterial blood supply. So when a human subject like me would start blowing into the instrument, the first breath that's going to come out of my body will be whatever I had in my mouth, throat, upper chest. I've got to continue blowing for a while so that the molecules of ethanol at the bottom of my lungs have time to kind of go up through the trachea, through my mouth, and into the instrument. The makers of this instrument have figured out that for most human beings, a period of time of 4.5 seconds and 1.5 liters of air should be sufficient for the molecules, the last molecules coming out of the sample, to be the representative of what's in the lowest part of the lung. Again, these would be the molecules of ethanol that are closest to the arterial blood supply. You agree with that, or think I'm making this up?
No, I agree with it.
Okay, just checking. I don't want to say anything wrong here.
No.
So, I would take it that, Dr. Bertel or whoever developed these are based upon large epidemiological studies. When you're stopping to think about big people, tall people, short, fat, whatever, Take a look at this. The human subject is blowing in here, okay, starting to blow. And remember, the first molecules are coming out of his mouth and throat and things of that nature. And Kevin said before, it's a free-flowing system, so it's actually technically going here and out and out. But once there's enough air, you've got to the end where the sample is, from the bottom. He stops blowing, and the outlet valve is going to shut, trapping in here 70 milliliters of ethanol molecules. Again, assuming the guy's been drinking. These molecules will be all lined up here uniformly, as all molecules do when they're in a closed space. Okay? Everybody got that? But the key is to kind of get this, have them blowing long enough and enough volume so that you have some reasonable assurance that what you're getting is the air from the bottom of the lungs. Now, we need to talk about this 1.2 liters of air for women. This is so colossally stupid that I really don't want to take the time to do it, but we have to because it's in play. So, Johnny, tell everybody the truth. Expose this scandal. What happened here? Why is it that women over 60 get a break?
During Chun, during the evaluation stage at the forensic lab, they had a bunch of these set up, and every time somebody walked into the lab in Hamilton for any reason, they'd ask you to blow into it because they would do it. Dr. Bertel was doing some studies on breath volume. One Thanksgiving, Dr. Bertel had his mother-in-law visiting. Thought he'd bring her to work to show her what he does. She blew in. She was 70 years old. She could not get 1.5 liters. The only person they ever had in that lab that blew in that couldn't get 1.5 liters was Dr. Bertel's mother-in-law. During Chun, of course, in the discovery, that data was turned over to defense. Judge King just set it at 60. He said 1.2 liters because I believe that's what Tom Bertel's mother-in-law hit, and that's where we are. I mean, there is some logic to it. Women generally are smaller than men, generally have less breath volume than men. Older individuals, whether male or female, tend to not be able to blow as much. So it does make some sort of sense. But the 60-year-old woman, 1.2 liters, was just pulled out of the air.
If you remember in the Chun decision, our Supreme Court devoted probably 10 pages of the case to discussing this issue and talking about it in the context of equal rights and things of that nature, or equal protection, I think, actually. So, I mean, it was a big deal in the case. As a practical matter, I don't think it all matters all that much. The software is still not ready to handle this. I guess in the next iteration of software we get, it'll automatically adjust itself when it sees it as dealing with a female subject who's the age of 60 or over. Now, these issues are in play in another context, but before I do that, I just want to ask you one quick question. On these instructions you talked about, it seems to me that in order to get a proper sample from a human being, it requires coaching and encouragement. And you said there's standard language, which I take it came out of the Chun decision, right, Johnny?
Correct.
And it was in Judge King's report. The Supreme Court picks up on it, literally has it in the body of the opinion. What is the SOP about this language? What are the cops supposed to do? Or do they do it right?
Yeah, to do it right, they have to read that verbiage before every breath sample. So, as I said earlier, the instrument's going to allow 11 attempts at collecting 2 valid breath samples. If they give the subject 11 attempts, every attempt that they provide, they have to read that verbiage and they have to change the mouthpiece. It's imperative that both of these are done every single breath sample that is delivered to the instrument.
And what about coaching?
Yeah, they coach. I train them. You know, the officers want to know the reading. They don't want refusals. I can guarantee you this. I used to try to talk people into taking the breathalyzer test when I locked them up because I wanted to know what they were because I locked them up because I knew they were, or I thought they were over the legal limit. They want to get samples. So what they do is they put a mouthpiece on here. I train them to keep them handcuffed because they don't need their hands to blow into here. Keep them handcuffed. They're still under arrest. Keep them seated. You hold the breath hose for them. And you coach them. Keep blowing, keep blowing, keep blowing. And when you want them to stop, say stop, take the mouthpiece away from them. If you see a lot of alcohol influence reports and you see blowing not allowed. You ever see that error message, blowing not allowed? But you'll see 2.1 liters, 6.8 seconds. They met both of the minimum criteria, but why did we get an error message? What happened, ladies and gentlemen, the defendant is providing a sample, and they stop for a tenth of a second, an eighth of a second, and then they started blowing again. This instrument, once you stop blowing, you can't start again, and that's what happens. They blow into the instrument, 4.8 seconds, 1.6 liters. Then they stop and they think they're helping the cop out or the officer out, and they blow again. That's when you get that blowing not allowed. And it's actually, they're going to change the verbiage on the new iteration of the firmware. It's going to be blowing interrupted, or
So he's going to say either double blow or interrupted blow.
yeah. But it's actually
Is that the only reason that would occur?
yes.
No, well, two reasons. It could also occur if they blow when the instrument's not ready to receive a sample. It's the same reason, but it could be if Kevin was just getting ready to test me and it wasn't really ready to accept a sample and I blew in or he blew in, or even if you wave the hose.
But 99% of the time it's because the defendant provided the sample, they met the minimum criteria, but they took a pause, just the slightest pause, and then tried to give a little extra. It's going to knock out the reading or the sample.
These issues are in play, not necessarily in the Alcatraz context, but in the refusal context. And hopefully you guys would just give me 45 seconds to discuss this with you, give you the cases, and then you can set up your defenses as appropriate. 3 cases you need to know about. The first being State versus Marquez. Marquez you're all familiar with already. This is the case that stands for the proposition that individuals who are being read paragraph 36 have a right to have it read to them in a language that they can understand while they're sober. And effective the 1st of July, the Attorney General has promulgated a variety of paragraph 36 in a wide array of foreign languages. So there are steps being taken that people can be educated about their responsibility under the implied consent statute. Toward the end of the decision, it might even be on the last page, our Supreme Court in dicta says that we are not going to permit the defense in a refusal case that you were too drunk to understand your obligation to take the test, okay? This is one of those areas in the law. I call them in my drunk driving book. These are forbidden or restrictions on defenses. You're just not allowed to raise this as a defense as a result of this language in the Marquez case. Okay. Now, when the Chun decision came out and the 60-year-old woman business was in play, I used to advocate on behalf of my refusal clients that my client, male or female, but usually male, was the functional equivalent from a pulmonary standpoint of a 60-year-old woman, in the sense that his pulmonary function is compromised, and that's what prevented him from giving the proper sample. I'm not talking about a situation where the guy just said, I'm not taking the test. I'm talking about a situation where the defendant attempted to take the test and was just not able to provide a proper sample, either because of time, couldn't blow in long enough, or couldn't provide sufficient volume. And normally I would have some kind of a letter from the guy's doctor saying he has, now fill in the blank, COPD, cancer, one lung, inveterate smoker, upper respiratory infection, whatever it was. Okay, I mean, there was some compromising of the pulmonary function of my client. There's no law about this. It's just an argument that I made, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Well, now this is in play, and the case on it is State versus Schmidt. Justice Rivera Soto, toward the end of the case, sets this up as a recognized offense in a refusal case. Again, not a situation where the guy absolutely refused to take the test, but an issue related to pulmonary function. It's certainly going to require some type of medical evidence, not necessarily from an expert, but a physician or somebody of that nature who would be able to provide some evidence to suggest that the defendant was physically incapable of providing the necessary sample because of some type of compromise of his lungs, unrelated to being a 60-year-old female. Okay? Now, the third issue I want to talk to you about in the refusal context comes from the appellate division case of State versus Rodriguez-Alejo. This is a case that has enormous entertainment value. In fact, you should find some pictures of, what's that stupid movie I always talk about? What? Scarface, that's right. Get a picture of, like, Tony Montana dancing with, what's her name? Michelle Pfeiffer. The 2 worst dancers in the history of all movies, by the way, but I digress. In the movie, as you all remember, Tony was accused by Michelle Pfeiffer in that particular scene of being just off the banana boat. Remember, Tony got real mad. What you talking about? I'm a political prisoner. Anyway, here's the facts of the case. This guy literally is just off the banana boat. All right, he's been in the United States for 2 whole weeks, and surprisingly, he's not sick of it yet. He comes from Cuba. speaks no English, and he's in a situation where he doesn't have to speak English. His whole neighborhood, everybody speaks Spanish. His boss speaks Spanish. Everything's Spanish wherever he is, so there's no reason for him to learn how to speak English. The police arrest him for drunk driving, and they bring him back, and I think he knows 3 words of English, 2 of which are yes and no. So they get to the point where they're reading in paragraph 36, and they say, now will you take the test? And he takes a lucky guess and says, yeah. All right? Says yes. So they take him over to the instrument, and now they're trying to explain to him how to give a sample. He has no idea what these cops are telling him. Why? Number 1, because he's drunk, and number 2, he doesn't speak English. The cops, on their side, they're sober, presumably, but they don't speak any Spanish. Now, the holding in this case is really kind of interesting because the initial reaction of the appellate division when they're going through the facts is, well, here's the obvious solution if he doesn't understand how to take the test. Just keep reading paragraph 36 to him until he figures it out, all right? That didn't work out too well. So the appellate division creates an affirmative defense that you can raise in a refusal case where there's a language issue, all right? And basically it stands to the proposition that you just didn't understand what the instructions were on how to provide a proper sample. Now, there's a mistake in the case. I want everybody to be aware of it, so if you get into municipal court, you can argue it appropriately. The appellate division says that the burden of production on this defense is on the defendant, and that's perfectly fine because any affirmative defense, the burden is going to be on the defendant to put it in play, so to speak. But they also say, kind of sloppily, that the burden of proof is also on the defendant. Number 1, I don't know how you can constitutionally ever put a burden of proof on a defendant ever in a quasi-criminal case. The burden never shifts from the state. Number 2, if there is a burden of proof, which would be certainly novel, they don't tell you what it is. All right, they just say, and they say it twice in the opinion, the burden of production and the burden of proof is on the defendant. I think the better way to look at it is the burden of going forward with the evidence would be on the defendant. Is perfectly fine. There is no burden of proof. The only burden would be that the state, once the defendant puts it in play, would have to disprove it beyond a reasonable doubt, like you would do in any other criminal or quasi-criminal case. But I want everybody to be aware of this so that, Kevin has indicated to you that there's specific verbiage. It's in the opinion. It's supposed to be over top of every machine, read before every test, along with his coaching in order to give a good sample. And if the defendant just doesn't understand it because of a language issue, that is an affirmative defense that you can utilize in a refusal situation. Okay. Now, the next one I like to call the continuous floater. I like to call this the birthday candle issue. Can you talk to everybody about that?
Sure. The defendant must blow for a minimum of 2.5 liters per minute. And that might sound like a lot to you sitting there, 2.5 liters per minute. If this instrument was working, it's 46 inches long, completely heated. It's heated to 43 degrees C, plus or minus 3, prevent condensation. We don't want moisture getting inside that cuvette and forming on the mirrors. If we had, condensation drops on the mirror, the energy couldn't possibly not make the reflections. We'd have problems. 2.5 liters per minute is barely a whisper. I could blow over the top of this breath hose, and it would say, blowing not allowed. That would be greater than 2.5 liters per minute. So to provide a sample to this instrument, a slow, steady sample is better than a real forceful sample because people tend to run out of air quicker if they blow real hard or real forceful. Slow and steady gets the job done.
Let's just look at it logically, all right? We've got a human being blowing into the instrument, all right? Blowing, blowing, blowing. Breath is coming in here, going into the instrument, out through the top until you've blown in at least 4.5 seconds, 1.5 liters of air, okay? Now, the more he blows, remember the more you blow, the higher you go. There are more and more molecules of ethanol saturating this sample chamber as it gets more, for want of a better term, richer molecules from toward the bottom of the lung. Remember, the most intense molecules of ethanol are going to be in the bottom of the lung, all right? So the concentration, I guess the best way to say, of ethanol molecules should be growing in here all the time, right? But at some point, look, even a speeding train has to come to a stop. At some point, there's just no more alcohol in your body, okay? You can only be so drunk. I apologize to my clients for that all the time, but I say, there's a limit. You can only be so drunk, okay? So what's happening here is that the minute the instrument detects alcohol, ethanol in the chamber, it starts doing calculations, okay, figuring out how much it is. And what it is anticipating, if you were to graph it, is kind of like a standardized pattern. Let's make like a little graph of this thing, okay? Let's say that this up and down here, this is BAC. This is 0. This is whatever you want it to be. 0.45. Doesn't matter. This is time. This is time 0. Maybe this will be 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever you want it to be. It doesn't make any difference. All right? The subject is blowing into the instrument. When we start off at 0, there's no molecules of ethanol in here at all. Now it starts to detect molecules of ethanol, and the BAC will start to rise over time. Okay? Easy. But once the chamber is saturated, it has all the molecules of ethanol. There's nothing more coming in. That's it. You've reached everything. You should plateau. You should get to the point where it says there's nothing more. I've gotten all the alcohol there is in this guy's sample. There's nothing more coming in here. Okay? Now, technically, in the truest scientific sense, you don't really get a plateau. You get a very, very, very tiny, slight rise. But this is the pattern that the instrument is looking for. This would be a good pattern for it. Now, there's no graph that's happening here. This is all happening inside the memory of the instrument, all right? Although I think some of the states do. Alabama, yeah, they will graph it. So you get a pattern like that where it just kind of comes in and then it reaches this plateau. As far as the instrument's concerned, you've gotten a normal sample. That's the way things should normally go, and you've gotten the maximum amount of alcohol out of the guy's system. When the pattern deviates from this, you get error messages, okay? 2 in particular are of importance. Number 1, it never reaches the plateau, okay? It'll either keep going up or it kind of gets here and then it drops off again, okay? And what's the error message for that, Kevin?
Yeah, plateau not achieved.
Okay, and that means that?
And what's happening, like Bob said, there's a graph. As it comes up the plateau, the instrument's taking a snapshot of that reading every quarter second. It's looking at the reading every quarter second, make sure it doesn't see more than 1% change of the reading over that quarter second. So it's taking a snapshot every quarter second. If it sees more than 1% change, it's going to flag it for either mouth alcohol, 99.9, it flags it for mouth alcohol. If it sees more than 1% change of that reading over a quarter second time frame. Mouth alcohol is the one error message that it will see. The second one is, as Bob said, if it goes up, it never plateaus. It never reaches. You only see some really high readings. When they blow in, there are a 2.5 or a 2.8, but they only blew for 1.8 liters. They never reach plateau because they never achieved it.
That's your question, though. If you know what you're doing, if you're an educated drunk, if I blow into this, I can blow well over 3 liters. Okay, I know that. So if I blow in here and I know what I'm doing, and I blow 1.8 liters and I blow for 5 seconds, I've met those criteria. But the instrument's going to know I haven't peaked out yet. I'm still going up. I stopped blowing. So the first 2 criteria, 1.5 and 5 seconds, are going to be met.
Plus the flow rate will be met as well.
What's that?
Probably the flow rate as well.
Oh, yeah, the flow rate would certainly be there. So what will happen is you'll have plateau not achieved. And that's because what happened is I never got to that final expiratory air that they're looking for. So that's when that can happen also. And that's one of the, you'll look like it's a good sample other than that.
Well, bear with me, guys, because there's one thing here. This is vitally important, okay, that comes out of this. Much more important than plateau not achieved. And Kevin just touched on it, but I just want to give you how the machine's going to react to it. Okay, coming up, coming up, coming up. Got a little bit of plateau, then boom, gets a spike and comes back down again. The instrument likely will interpret that as mouth alcohol detected. Okay, now get mouth alcohol detected. What happens is the instrument is going to shut itself down. It will not allow any additional tests on that sequence. They're going to have to start over again, and just kind of begin. They'll get a new sequential file number and begin again. I told you about this before, but I stressed to you that one of the mistakes that police make all the time is when they get mouth alcohol detected and they're ready to give the guy another set of tests, they don't wait 20 minutes again. Why? Well, number 1, it's boring. And number 2, I think they forget or they're just not that well trained on it. But you're never going to know about the mouth alcohol detected unless they've either given you the alcohol influence report that shows the error on it, which I doubt, or number 2, you get the data download. And the data download is going to reveal that.
Originally, they were going to have a 20-minute lockout after a mouth alcohol error. But there was concern that there were going to be like a checkpoint. You'd have 4 drunks lined up, and if it locked it out, you wouldn't be able to do anything for 20 more minutes, and you'd literally have hours. But one other thing I wanted to point out, we were talking about how you could manipulate that. Keep in mind, I'm the officer. You're blowing in. I'm watching. I get 10, 11, 12. That's good. That's enough. Stop blowing. I pull it away from you. I'm going to create that error by doing that. again, sometimes not intentionally, but I think I want to get a good sample. I want to get 10 or 20, whatever number, and they can actually, either intentionally or unintentionally induce that error because they pull it away too soon. You've met the 2 criteria, but not the 3rd.
Kevin, you agree with me though about the 20-minute issue on the mouth alcohol detected? This is a frequent error that the police make, which will be revealed by the data download.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move over to the art part of this, the advocacy part. And this is just a lot of this is going to be straight black letter law, but we've got to relate the advocacy back to the science, and you'll see how this all makes sense in a couple of seconds. So here we go. We're going to be talking only about per se violations, and per se violations where the evidence of the per se level, the BAC, is going to come through the alcohol test. So no breathalyzer information, no blood information. We're not going to talk about any of that. We're talking about per se violations only with evidence that has been produced by the alcohol test itself. There are elements, obviously, that have to be proved by the state. In addition to BAC, specifically, we start off with operation. Operation can be proved in one of 4 ways under New Jersey law, either by direct evidence in the sense that the officer saw the defendant operating the instrument, and that proves it without the need of an inference. Circumstantial proof, this is proof by way of inference. The guy ran into a tree, the cops show up, there he is behind the wheel of the wheel of the car, passed out, nobody else around. The inference is that this guy was the driver. It can also be proved by way of admission. You get 5 guys standing around an accident scene. The cop runs up and says, "All right, who's the driver?" "I was." All right. Just talked yourself into being convicted of drunk driving. But that is the admission. And finally, by way of stipulation, on occasion, you'll have cases where operation's not an issue and you just stipulate to it and kind of move on. So it's got to be one of those 4 ways where that element is going to be proved. The second element has to be proved that the arrest was based upon probable cause to believe that the defendant operated while under the influence of alcohol. This element never gets litigated in the trial itself. It's if it's going to be contested at all, it will be done by way of a motion to suppress evidence. An arrest is a seizure within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment, so if there's going to be a challenge to this, it'll have to happen as by way of a motion to suppress evidence on a pretrial basis, and then you'll just litigate it like you would any other motion to suppress evidence. The next element, this comes from the New Jersey implied consent statute, that the defendant has to be requested by a police officer to submit to the test. An officer has reasonable basis to believe that the defendant operated under the influence of alcohol. This invokes the so-called fellow officer rule. You know that police are, there's a kind of a hierarchy of how much credence police can put in information that comes to their attention. This kind of relationship between the source of the information and the need to corroborate. The highest level of reliability for information that police get comes from other police officers, which concomitantly requires the least amount of corroboration. So very frequently you'll see the fellow officer rule invoked in this situation where the officer who's running the alcohol test had nothing to do with the arrest of the defendant, but yet, based on the fellow officer rule, he can rely on what the arresting officer tells him in order to establish that there's a reasonable basis to believe that the defendant operated under the influence of alcohol. Notice that the level of belief is less than probable cause, the probable cause element already being established by virtue of the fact that he was arrested out on the street. Now, the next 5 elements are going to be proved through a combination of 2 things. A, testimony, and B, documents. And I've written the word core next to each one of these things, meaning that the evidence, the documentary evidence, will come from a so-called core foundational document. Now, you all remember in the Chun decision that our Supreme Court listed 12 categories of documents that should be provided on a routine basis in every case. And they have them listed in the body of the opinion. They also have them listed in an order at the end of the opinion. Among those documents, though, the Supreme Court singles out certain documents to be known as core foundational documents, as opposed to just foundational documents, which are discoverable. The core foundational documents need to go into evidence to support the admission and evidence, so to speak, of the alcohol test readings. Let's go through them very quickly here. Test administered within a reasonable period of time. This is information is provided by a core foundational document, specifically the alcohol influence report, which will show both the time of the arrest as well as the time that the first test was administered. The requirement that the test be administered within a reasonable period of time comes through the case law. This is State versus Tissio is the case. Tissio, the 1987 decision, which eliminated retrograde extrapolation as a defense in New Jersey. It's one of those prohibited defenses we talked about before this evening. The key is, though, that the opinion is not clear as to whether or not the test has to be administered within a reasonable period of time, either after arrest or after the defendant last operated his vehicle. Justice Handler, when he wrote the decision, seems to kind of jump back and forth in tissue, sometimes saying reasonable period of time after arrest and sometimes saying reasonable period of time after operation. The whole idea here, the concern of the Supreme Court, I don't think they took it all that seriously, is that once a defendant was arrested, the police would delay the administration of the breath test in order to allow any residual alcohol that was in his stomach to be fully absorbed into his bloodstream through the walls of the stomach and the intestines. The Supreme Court had very grave doubts that the police would be that devious or clever or industrious, I guess is the best way to say it. But as a sop to the defense bar, they required, without particularly well defining it, that the test must be administered within a reasonable period of time. So that element is going to be provided by this core foundational document, specifically the alcohol influence report. Test properly administered by a qualified operator. Really, you've got a couple different things going on here. The proper administration of the test normally is going to come through the alcohol influence report. Qualified operator is going to be proved by the operator's card, which you'll get in discovery, showing that he's qualified to operate the alcohol test. Instrument working properly is going to come from two sets of documents, actually three: alcohol influence report, the last time the solution was changed, and you'll also gather it from the last time the state police came in and calibrated the instruments. You really have three sets of core documents there. Valid sample provided, that's going to come strictly from the alcohol influence report. And finally, results of .08 or greater, that's going to come from the alcohol influence report. A result of .08 or greater is the violation, and I don't know of anything under New Jersey law that will allow you to rebut that type of evidence, or stated another way. At the end of the 104 hearing, once the judge has admitted the alcohol test readings and evidence, and the results are .08 or greater, that's the end of the case. The case is over. There's nothing more that you can do about it. There is no defense that you can raise under New Jersey law which will allow you to successfully rebut that evidence. By contrast, if the judge excludes the alcohol test readings, the case is over for the state at that point. Okay. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 second that your client can't be found guilty of, being under the influence of alcohol, drugs, or anything else, but the per se component of the case is over at that point, depending upon the ruling of the judge in the 104 hearing. So you can all see that 104 is of vital importance. I think in a very real sense, you have to think to yourselves that the 104 hearing is the trial. So you've really got to put your efforts when you're challenging alcohol test evidence into the 104 hearing, much more so than you would just consider it just for the trial purposes, because the 104 is the trial. Now, a couple of things on the 104 hearing. Here's the actual rule, and I want to just read it over to you so you'll be able to appreciate a little bit where we're going on this. Here's the rule when the qualifications of the person to be a witness or the admissibility of evidence, and that's what we're talking about here, the admissibility of these alcohol test results, or the existence of privilege is subject to a condition, and the fulfillment of the condition is an issue. The issue is to be determined by the judge. In making that determination, the judge shall not apply the rules of evidence except for Rule 403, which is waste of time, confusion of the issues, that type of thing, or a valid claim of privilege. So since the rules of evidence don't apply, are there any limitations on the judge admitting anything? And outside of Rule 403 or a valid claim of privilege, no. The only other caveat is that the judge be persuaded that the evidence is otherwise reliable. If the judge is satisfied that it's reliable, the judge can admit it without the formal rules of evidence, which are basically either, depending on how you interpret the case law, either dispensed with or relaxed. A couple of cases to that extent, especially dealing with the apparent reliability of the evidence, Cardone being the main case. Cardone is an old speeding case, K55 case. Same thing. In order to get the speed into evidence, you have to show all kinds of documents. It's been a year since I did one of those cases, but you guys are familiar with, tuning forks and the calibration on the K55. The appellate division says in Cardone, clearly the rule contemplates use of affidavits and other hearsay in such preliminary inquiries so long as the evidence appears to be reliable. A later case dealing with the breathalyzer, State versus Dome, there's a couple of domes, this is the second dome, standing for the same proposition. Now, the 104 hearing has a couple of collateral issues that are vitally important in Alcotest litigation. Specifically, Rule 104D. You may have to have your guy testify during the hearing. In fact, many times it'll be indispensably important that your guy testify. And I know a lot of members of the defense bar are hesitant to ever have their guy testify. But the bottom line on all this is that it's a no harm, no foul situation in the 104 hearing, because your guy is going to be afforded testimonial immunity as a result of his testimony. In other words, whatever he says during the 104 hearing is never going to be able to be utilized against him substantively in the trial of the case in chief. And besides that, the only time it would ever come up at all is if he testifies during the 104 hearing and then he testifies during the trial and he says something totally different than what he said in the 104 hearing. Under those circumstances, his 104 hearing testimony could be utilized against him, but only for the purposes of impeachment. This is a matter of constitutional principle, kind of imposed upon us by the United States Supreme Court. So the normal rule, if the defendant testifies during a criminal trial, he decides he's going to testify in his own case, is that he'll be subject to any cross-examination on any aspect of the case, unlike the normal witness who's going to be subject to cross-examination on the scope of his direct, as well as issues related to credibility, perception, and things like that, bias, bias or interest in the outcome. During the 104 hearing, if the defendant elects to testify, he's going to be treated like any other witness, in that his cross-examination will be limited to the scope of his direct, together with issues related to bias, interest in the outcome, which he certainly has an interest in. So kind of keep those things in the back of your mind. There's really very little harm you can suffer by having your client testify during the 104 hearing. I had a young woman in my office, 23 years old, very, very pretty young girl. And she's talking, and I'm listening to her. But, I have to tell you guys parenthetically, I don't pay attention to what they have to say, because really what they have to say is meaningless. It's nonsense. It has no value at all. You're just kind of going through and listening to their side of the story. Then you're going to talk to them. And then you're going to ultimately get the discovery, and then you find out what the case is all about. All right? But you have to go through the process. So she's talking, and all of a sudden, I see that she's got something in her mouth. And I asked her, I said, "What's that in your mouth?" She says, I forget, she said whether it was a tongue ring or tongue stud or something like that. I don't know why these young girls do this stuff to their bodies, get tattoos and things like that, but there it is. So I said to her, "Oh, that's interesting. How long you had that in your mouth?" "Oh, I think she said 2 years." And I said, "Oh, did you have that in there when the trooper stopped you?" "Yep." "Oh, that's interesting. Did the trooper ask you to take that out of your mouth?" "No." I said, "Oh, so you took the test with that tongue ring in your mouth?" "Yeah." What do you think there, Kevin? Is that a problem?
Inspect the oral cavity, make sure there's no gum, chewing tobacco, foreign objects in the person's mouth during the breath test. The officer or trooper should have made the individual, the young lady, take the tongue stud out, wait 20 minutes, and then provide the breath samples.
Two parts to that, by the way. Watch this, guys. If they do discover something in the oral cavity, chewing tobacco, gum, penny, I had a guy who did that one time. Once they remove that, the troopers are supposed to start counting the 20-minute deprivation period anew. All right, that's verbatim out of the Chun decision. So there's really two issues here: A, did they remove it? And B, if they did remove it, did they start the 20-minute period over again? Which they're not going to be happy about, especially if they went through the 20 minutes once. Now, it's counterintuitive, but this is just the way this is. I mean, if you've got a 104 hearing, the rules of evidence don't apply. They don't apply. But there is a rule of evidence that applies, and it has to do with the burden of proof. The burden of proof in a 104 hearing related to drunk driving is proof by clear and convincing evidence. That was given to us by the Supreme Court in Romano versus Kimmelman, and actually comes through State versus Johnson back to, I think, 1964. So I want to read this to you. You'll see the pinpoint site. This is language out of Romano versus Kimmelman, written by Justice Handler. "In this case, we hold that the burden of proof prescribed under State versus Johnson," again, this is 1964, "is to be followed to establish all the conditions necessary for the admissibility of a breathalyzer test. Under Johnson, conditions of admissibility must be clearly established. To avoid any confusion over what is intended by this level of proof, it should be understood that it conforms to that standard conventionally referred to as clear and convincing proof," or we would say these days clear and convincing evidence. "The conditions of admissibility to which this burden of proof shall apply include those presently required to establish the admissibility of the results of the breathalyzer test, namely, proper operating condition of the machine, requisite qualifications of the operator, and proper administration of the test. Now, guys, do me a favor. Circle that last language here, okay? Because you're going to see that in State versus Chun, Justice Owens picks this language up, cuts and pastes it into Chun, and then expands it favorably to the defense bar, all right? Circle that, though. You're going to see this come up in a couple seconds. We further hold the responsibility for establishing all conditions as to the admissibility of the breathalyzer is properly allocated to the state. This is the rule with respect to the usual conditions of admissibility under Johnson. There's the pinpoint citation. Johnson, by the way, can be cited at 42 New Jersey, page 146. Now, we know that the burden of proof on the state is to establish conditions of admissibility by clear and convincing evidence. By way of advocacy, I'm going to suggest to all of you that if you're in a fight with the prosecutor on a factual issue, a contested issue in a 104 hearing, and the judge is going to have to make a call, before you get into the 104 hearing, you give the judge a copy of this case, not the case, but just the page at least. Read it into the record and contextualize the evidence the judge is going to hear. Then when all the proofs are in, when you're giving your closing statement, you'll be able to go back to this definition and explain to the judge why it was that the state did not meet its burden. Here's the definition. This comes from In Re Seaman. This is the official definition of clear and convincing evidence. It's evidence that produces in the mind of the trier of fact a firm belief or conviction as to the truth of the allegations sought to be established. Evidence so clear, direct, and weighty and convincing as to enable the fact finder to come to a clear conviction without hesitancy of the precise facts in issue. Visualize yourself in a jury trial and not asking the judge to charge the jury about what the definition of proof beyond a reasonable doubt is. Nobody sitting in this room would ever do that. You want the judge to charge them on the definition of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, 5 times, 6 times, as many times as possible, okay? You would be extremely foolish. It would be reckless for you to try a 104 hearing and then rely on the judge's personal predilections or ideas about what clear and convincing evidence is. You can't trust judges to know that stuff. Rather than do that, you've got a clear, distinct, definite definition given to us by our Supreme Court. This is what the definition is. Give the judge a copy. Read it into the record. And then weave your arguments about it at the end where you're going to argue that the state did not prove it. You might even want to talk about it. Say, hey, Judge, I was watching you when you were listening to this evidence. You didn't look like you were clearly convinced. Didn't look to me like you were accepting this without hesitancy. Looked like you had a whole lot of hesitancy when you heard that evidence, okay? At least the judge will be making a determination based upon the law as opposed to his own personal predilections and give you a much better shot if you can have these cases decided within the proper context. Everybody cool with that? Very important. This is an extremely high burden for the state to meet, but it's not going to mean anything unless you educate the judge. All right, and there's the pinpoint set on Seaman. This definition, by the way, has been quoted probably a dozen times since then by both the Supreme Court and the Appellate Division. So it's really it's out there. It's not anything really controversial. All right, let's get into the elements of proof. We talked about this one a little bit earlier. I just want to repeat. This is the New Jersey Implied Consent Statute. I've corrected the legislature's grammar here. So the samples be made in accordance with the provisions of this act and at the request of a police officer who has reasonable grounds to believe that such person has been operating a motor vehicle in violation of 39-450. Notice they've added in the baby drunk since that time. So this is the element that comes from the New Jersey Implied Consent Statute. All right, let's get into the core foundational documents, all right? This comes right out of Chun. Here we go. Our analysis of the general scientific reliability of the alcotest is grounded in part on our expectation that there will be proof that the particular device that has generated an alcohol influence report being offered into evidence was in good working order and that the operator of the device was appropriately qualified to administer the test. You can see where this is going now. Remember back to Romano. This requirement that the test be supported by foundational proofs for admissibility has been part of our jurisprudence since we decided Romano. Now here's the cut and paste. There, we demanded as a precondition of admissibility of the results of the breathalyzer, the state was required to establish 1, the device was in working order and had been inspected according to procedure. 2, operator was certified. And 3, test was administered according to official procedure. Okay? Everybody got that? Notice how they've expanded slightly, subtly, and this is very nuanced, but it's there, the requirements that are set forth in Romano versus Kimmelman. Now, what I'm telling all of you is this little statement here is the key to successful defense of Alcatraz cases. And it comes back to the point that you just made a moment ago. Think about these things as being elements that the state has to prove during the 104 hearing. Essentially, they have 4 different elements that they have to establish, and they have to establish it by clear and convincing evidence, okay? What are those elements? 1, the device was in proper working order, okay? It was working okay. 2, it had been inspected according to procedure. 3, operator was certified. 4, test was administered according to official procedure. Each one of these elements has to be proved by clear and convincing evidence during the 104 hearing. If you miss one of them, the results are not admissible. So getting back to the point you made a moment ago, if you have someone who has, let's take something simple. You got a 20-minute violation, all right? The cops didn't wait 20 minutes. When the cops don't wait 20 minutes, that means that the test was not administered according to official procedure. How do we know the official procedure? Because the Supreme Court tells us what the official procedure is. How did they find out? From John and the other prosecutors, as well as the defense bar, from Judge King. Judge King, after listening to the evidence, set forth in his reports the official procedure. The Supreme Court picks up on it and literally prints it out in the Chun decision. It doesn't matter whether or not it had an impact on the accuracy of the test. She has a tongue ring in her mouth, okay? The official procedure, the proper way to administer this is to remove things from the oral cavity. It doesn't matter whether or not it affects the test. That's not the issue. The issue is that the test was not administered according to official procedure. They can't prove that last element by clear and convincing evidence when the evidence suggests she has a tongue ring in her mouth, or a penny, or chewing gum, or tobacco, or whatever it may be, okay? You have to focus on this, not whether or not it ultimately would have had something to do with the test. The official procedure says remove cell phones and other portable electronic devices from the testing area. Right. Okay? That's fine. Supreme Court says that the instrument is probably not susceptible to RFI, so what's the point of removing cell phones? Answer, I don't know. It doesn't matter. The official procedure says remove cell phones and portable electronic devices. If they don't, the test is not being administered according to official procedure. You got that? The state will not be able to demonstrate that during the 104 hearing by clear and convincing evidence. So you've really got to focus on these as opposed to any type of impact it might have had in the test, which was going to be more speculative than anything else. Now, we'll be coming back to these with respect to all 4 of these kind of elements. They've kind of made them in 3, but there's really 4 there. You can see because this is conjunctive, device working in working order, and have been inspected according to procedure. We'll come back to this in a moment. Foundational documents, we conclude, need to be entered into evidence are few. The paragraph prior to this passage, the Supreme Court goes through the 12 documents we talked about, series, classifications of documents that you're supposed to get in the discovery package. They don't include the downloads because that really wasn't in play at this point, except to the extent that they said you're entitled to them. And the court goes through, and then they have to make a decision what documents are really going to be necessary in the average Yogi Bear case to have to support the Alcatraz readings coming in that are basically going to demonstrate these 4 things: in working order, inspected according to procedure, qualified operator, administered according to procedure. Here are the documents they say will satisfy those proofs. Foundational documents that we conclude need to be entered into evidence are few. Most recent calibration report prior to the defendant's test with Part 1 control test, Part 2 linearity test, and credentials of the coordinator who performed the calibration. Number 2, most recent new standard solution report. 3, certificate of analysis of the 1.0 solution used in the defense control test. Absent a pretrial challenge to the admissibility of an AR based on one of the other foundational documents produced in discovery, we perceive no reason why they be made part of the record routinely. Now, here on page 145, they have singled out what they deem to be 3 different classifications of core foundational documents. I will tell you there are 2 additional that you need to know about that are core foundational documents defined in other parts of the case, and they come as no surprise to you. The alcohol influence report is a core foundational document, and worksheet A is a core foundational document. Now, I think with the next iteration of the software, it will not be needed anymore. It'll be obsolete. But for now, that is also a core foundational document. So here is a list of the 6 core foundational documents. Operator's qualification card. And we're going to get into these things specifically. This is on page 134 of the opinion. Most recent calibration from the state police at page 145. Standard solution change, 145. Certificate of analysis using the defendant's test, that's on 145. I just told you a moment ago about the alcohol influence report on page 134. And worksheet A, tolerance calculations, which you mentioned ago, that's on pages 150 and 151 of the opinion. Okay? Let's get into these specifically. All right? This is a list. Let's talk about each one of them individually and relate these core foundational documents back to the science we were talking about. All right. Kevin, what in the world is this?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the certification of his attending the breath test class. Thomas Everett from Lawrence Township. He attended the class 23 September 2005. I can tell you for a fact that he attended a one-day conversion class. Anybody in the state who had a breathalyzer certification to gain their certification for the ALCO test, one-day conversion class, because they already attended the breathalyzer class. Anybody in 05 we didn't start the 4-day ALCO test class till 08 or 09. I think it was 08. So anybody prior to 08 is a one-day conversion class, and then his certification is good for the remainder of the year plus 2 full calendar years. Everybody expires on the end of the month, December 31st, 2000 and whatever. So Mr. Patrolman Everett here was good all of 2005, 2006, all 2007. During the calendar year 2007, he needs to get back to an ALCO test recertification class, which is a one-day class that gets him back up to speed. As you can see, he attended a class December 19th, 2007, Ocean County Police Academy, and my good buddy Craig Potter signed the cards that day.
John Delcolo, I got a question for you.
Yep.
All right. Here's the question.
Mic on?
Let us assume, for the sake of argument, that a local police officer has administered a test and his card has been expired by a week. What is the impact of that?
It's invalid. They're suspended administratively if it expires.
And how long are they suspended administratively?
How long?
Right.
Until they get recertified.
But I mean, there's a 1 year initial period.
They have a 1 year window, at which time they can go back and do a 1 day refresher, as it were, to get recertified. If they go beyond that year, then they have to go through the full course again. The Administrative Code 1351 sets forth who may be an operator, how they have to be trained, how they're certified. The operators are certified for 2 years upon completion of their training. It's 2 years, including the calendar year they're in, or the calendar year they're in a subsequent 2 years. So somebody who's certified in 2011 is good for the rest of 2012 is good for the rest of this year, 2013, 2014. By the end of 2014, they have to come back for recert, or they are administratively suspended.
That code provision I just told you about would make the results of the test inadmissible in evidence, okay? This is not through the case law. It's not by statute. It's by New Jersey Administrative Code provision. So if you get one of these situations where the officer's card was expired, you get it discovered and the card's expired, the case is over, at least as part of the ALCO test part, because the New Jersey Administrative Code makes it inadmissible. Okay, so you just show the prosecutor and give them the NJAC provision, and they can figure out how they're going to go from there. Now, just in terms of how you're going to handle this, because you'll get cards all the time that are expired. And it's going to be one of two things. It's really, you only have two choices. Either it's expired because it's expired, or it appears to be expired, but yet he went and got himself, recertified properly. It's just the discovery clerk does not have a copy of the correct card. My own personal feeling is it's really no harm, no foul to tell the prosecutor, hey, look, I don't have the right card here. You either have it or you don't. If you don't have it, the case is over. If you do have it, good, let's move on to the next defense. I can't imagine a judge of the municipal court in the middle of a trial where, the prosecutor introduces a card that's correct and the one you had was bad and you start screaming about it, that the judge is not going to let that go in. I may be wrong, but it just seems to me that that's something they would admit during the 104 hearing. So you can handle it whichever way you think is best. I'm just suggesting to you that you understand the significance of when you see that the card has been expired. Okay?
What's even a bigger issue, Bob, if the guy that changed the simulator solution is expired and he changed the solution, that could affect up to 25 drunk drivers. We had an issue recently down in Atlantic County where the guy that changed the simulator solution on the instrument was expired. And I was involved in a case. That's why I like seeing the solution change operator certification card. If he's expired, you're going to affect up to 25 drunk driving cases by him not being certified. And in this instance, the defense attorney I was working for, the readings were not admissible. And we won the case.
You should be getting 3 sets of cards in your discovery package, okay? 2 of the 3 are core foundational documents. The one of the officer who ran your guy's test, that's a core foundational document. You're going to get core foundational documents of cards from the trooper who performed the 6-month calibration, and that's okay. But and I've said this to Kevin before, it's inconceivable to me that a breath test coordinator's card would expire. He'd be incapable of doing his job. You agree with that?
100%.
Okay. So I mean, you can look at it, but I don't think that that's going to be particularly good.
Well, you know, there's in the administrative code, it says that if that replica card of the certificate is prima facie evidence of their certification and their qualification.
Right.
Under the Administrative Procedures Act, you really have to go back, I think, to the AG and challenge the certification. And then once you get a final decision from the AG saying, yes, they're certified, then you can take that to the appellate division. But I think that's the proper procedure, actually. I mean, that's what, when I was on the other side, that's what we always argued. If you want to challenge an operator's credentials, and trust me, I think the terms qualified and certified are 2 different animals. They're all certified, but 10% of them are actually qualified. So, no, I'm being real. I mean, most of them, just like train, just push a button, they don't know what they're doing. But I digress a little bit, I guess. But, that was how, we always were told that's how, when these challenges came up, tell them, take it up through the administrative process. You don't like the final decision of the AG, then you go to the appellate division.
Core foundational document then, good for the year you're in, plus 2 additional calendar years. They're all going to expire on December 31st of some time. And you can see here, this Officer Everett, he sneaked in under the wire with about 12 days to go in the year to get himself recertified. Now, the next documents I want to talk about come from the State Police Coordinator. We talked a little bit before, earlier on tonight, about how the troopers have to go in every 6 months and recalibrate these instruments. And we know that the 6-month requirement is as a result of the Chun decision from our Supreme Court. Everybody's got that so far. What I'd like to do is utilize a little bit of creative visualizations, because I want you to understand step by step what the trooper is doing when he goes in and does this, because it's going to help you understand the other core foundational documents. So I'm going to ask you some questions now. You're not under oath, but, All right, here we go. First of all, how many can they do a day?
2.
All right.
2 instruments a day.
They work how many days a week?
4.
10-hour shifts?
Yes, sir.
All right. Do they have to wear state police uniform?
They do not.
And do they have to wear a tie?
Only if they're going to court.
Okay. So they can wear just regular street clothes?
Well, they wear golf shirts that have the emblem on it, state police emblem, and BDU pants and boots.
Okay.
Usually.
Do they have to carry firearms with them?
They do carry firearms. Whether it's with them or in the car, that's debatable.
You know that's asking for trouble, right?
I left mine in the car.
Okay, good. So they drive to a PD, local PD.
Yes.
Right? They walk in and say to the sergeant, who's ever in charge there, hey, it's been 6 months. I'm here to recalibrate your instrument. Right?
Correct.
What's the very next thing that the trooper does?
First thing he'll do, he's going to first of all, he's going to download the information. We spoke about that earlier. He takes the laptop, hooks it up to the instrument, and he downloads the information, and that's clear in the memory. Once he downloads that information into his laptop from the instrument is wiped clean. So you can't go back into the instrument and get copies out. They're gone.
Realistically, how many drunk driving, over a 6-month period, even in a busy department, would you say? Like East Brunswick or Hamilton Township down in Atlantic County. I mean, how many would they have typically?
Well, I know the busiest departments down here in South Jersey are State Police, Belmar and the Atlantic City Expressway. So if you go to court in Hamilton Township, Atlantic County, they do the most drunks out of any town in the state of New Jersey, only because Hamilton Township's busy, but they have the Atlantic City Expressway running through there. And when you're on the road, you know what courts you want to work in. We can pick and choose where you stop people. Hamilton Township gets a lot of business from the state police on the expressway.
Do they have a judge in their court?
Very pro-state.
A very knowledgeable judge. Let's
Very,
put it that way.
very knowledgeable.
And now the next thing.
Can't speak highly enough about them.
And then the next thing you're going to say is that they've been serving liquor inside these casinos. Is that true?
I believe they do.
All right. This is shocking.
It actually got so bad on the expressway, cars would come through the toll plaza. They knew our code out there on the toll. They say, State Police, you got a signal 14 heading westbound in a blue Chevy. Signal 14 is our code for a drunk driver. So they would call them out to the State Police on the expressway, the toll plaza collectors. They know, signal 14, westbound, blue Chevy, PA tag. And they would pick them off like fish. Boom, man, just pull them over.
Now, quick question. How many on a really good 6 months in Hamilton Township, Atlantic County, how many would they actually have there that have to be downloaded?
Well, see, Hamilton, I'm going to say, in Camden County, probably the busiest PD is Cherry Hill, Gloucester Township, Pennsauken. And Pennsauken does about 300 a year, 350. They have 2 instruments, so they might have 100 on each instrument because they rotate back and forth. I can tell you, Belmar State Police, they have 3 instruments at Belmar State Police Station. They lock up a lot of drunks out of Belmar.
Which Belmar?
South,
Okay.
Atlantic County, because they handle the bridges, coming
They
up
actually
42.
moved it. They moved it to Camden County.
100 drunks maybe after 6 months, 150.
150?
Yeah.
Realistically, nobody's going to hit 1,000 drunks over a 6-month period.
Nobody.
That's not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
Okay. So the first thing that the breath test coordinator does is he's going to download, he's going to burn he's going to download to his laptop and burn a CD for a redacted CD for the local police, an unredacted CD for the local police. Does he burn a CD for himself too, or does that just goes on the laptop?
No, it just stays on the laptop.
Okay. What's the very next thing that the breath test coordinator does?
All right, the next thing he's going to do, ladies and gentlemen, he's going to use the department simulator, and he's going to calibrate this instrument, get a brand new bottle of 10, 0.10 that he brings himself. So the state police will buy 1,400 bottles of 10 because Tom Bertel, the director, didn't want us using the department's 10. He wanted 2 different lot numbers for the calibration procedure, so there's no theory about you're using the same lot to calibrate versus test the defendant.
So
they use 2 different lot numbers.
Kevin, so what you're saying is the police have their own stash, so to speak, of solution that they use when they're doing their solution changes. But the trooper who's coming there to do the recalibration, he ignores that. He's bringing his own 10 solution.
He's bringing his own 10 that the state police bought, all 1,400 bottles.
Now, that 10 he's brought has been tested by the forensic laboratories to know, and you're confident that if you heat it to 34 degrees, it's going to give you a 10 reading, right?
That's correct.
Okay. What's the next thing that he does?
After he's done calibrating the instrument, we're going to check the instrument to make sure it calibrated itself properly. So the next test they'll do is a control test part 1, where they're doing 6 tests, all for that simulator solution that they just calibrated the instrument with. So they calibrate it. How do we know it calibrated itself properly? We do a control test part 1.
Can you tell everybody about, when we talk about calibrating the machine, what are we really saying?
What's really happening is when they come in, once they download the data, they recalibrate the instrument. And what they're doing is essentially setting it back at 0. I always say it's like a bathroom scale. You go in the morning, you look at it, the little needle's off by a little bit, you crank it back to get it to 0, so when you get on the scale, you get a true weight. Sometimes you crank it a little lower than 0, so you get a favorable weight. But that's what they're doing. They're just zeroing it out again. They're putting it back, not a 0, but a 10. They're 10-ing it out. And so that's what they're doing during the calibration, recalibration.
So what's happening now is this. They've got a brand new bottle solution, okay? They put that into the simulator, and they say to the Alcotest, hey, Alcotest, listen, this is a 0.10 solution, okay? Adjust yourself so when you see this strength, you'll recognize this to be a 10. And the instrument should then readjust itself to say, oh, okay, now I know what a 10 looks like. Do you get any message from here?
It comes up on the screen. It'll say adjustment made. Actually, it makes the adjustment, and it says it right on the screen, adjustment made. Now you know it's at a 10, but to check that it adjusted itself properly, that's the second part of the calibration process.
Bob, just a point of information. The reason that we're doing this every 6 months now is the Alcotest has an internal recalibration process. It's an algorithm that readjusts the EC to come into compliance with the IR based on the control tests. Okay, it's a lot of mumbo jumbo, but it has a way it would correct itself. It would do that. The Supreme Court wasn't comfortable with that. They wanted the manual recalibration by the state police using new simulated solution. They wanted to take the they don't want the instrument checking itself. They wanted the state police coming in and manually doing it. So that's how we get back to the 6 months. That's exactly what happened there.
So this first step in recalibrating the machine, you're putting a solution into the simulator of a known strength, a 0.10 strength. How do you know? And you're going to get this in discovery because there's a report from the New Jersey State Police Forensic Laboratories showing that they've tested it through headspace gas chromatography. It's within the appropriate range that it will produce a 1O vapor. Okay? The instrument will now adjust itself, recalibrate itself to the strength that was in that solution. So now it basically says, okay, now I know what a 1O looks like. That is 1O, and I've kind of made myself recognize that as a 0.10, right?
Right.
So now this sheet, again, getting back to jargon, is called the cover sheet. Doesn't have any results on here as to what happened, but this is the evidence that will demonstrate to you that the instrument was recalibrated when the trooper came in. This is the first document that they're going to get out. Can you talk about the cover sheet a little bit, Kevin?
As I said earlier, ladies and gentlemen, every time this instrument does a function, it assigns itself or assigns a sequential file number. This is the sequential file number for this recalibration is 00203. Now you go across, it says calibration date. It gives you the date the calibration took place. This instance, it was October 23rd, 2007. You go over one more column, it tells you how many times this instrument's been recalibrated or calibrated. And you can see 4 times. So once you learn how to read these documents, there's a wealth of knowledge or information you can glean from these reports. 203rd function, October 23rd, 2007, 4th time the instrument's been recalibrated. It gives you, the wet here says wet is because we're using a wet bath simulator. We could use dry gas with the 7110, but they selected the wet bath simulator, hence the word wet. That's why it shows up wet. CU34, calibrating unit, 34 degrees. The serial number of the simulator that they're using to calibrate the instrument. And that serial number is the department's simulator. So the coordinator can say, I tested the department simulator during the calibration process because I used it during the calibration and the control test. 0.10 solution, expiration date, the lot number, and the bottle number. With the new iteration of the firmware, it's going to have the temperature probe serial number and the probe value, and it's going to have the digital NIST thermometer that's being used during the calibration process.
Now, guys, remember, all this cover sheet does is evidence that the trooper, first thing he did was to recalibrate the instrument in the way we've just described. Now that he's recalibrated, the next thing he's got to do is to test to see whether or not it's actually working, whether it does recognize what a 0.10 solution is. This comes from Part 1 control test. Now, notice that this is a document that is specifically mentioned by the Supreme Court as a core foundational document. What's this all about, Kevin?
Okay, this is the second part of the calibration process. Once the instrument's been calibrated, now we're going to make sure the instrument calibrated itself correctly. How do we do that? As you can see, we're going to do 3 tests. ECIR, ECIR, ECIR. We're drawing a sample off of that simulator of the solution that just calibrated it, and we should receive readings of 0.095 to 0.105. That's the acceptable range. In this instance here, 0.099 EC, 0.10. Second test, 0.099, 0.101. Third test, 0.100, 0.100. That instrument was recalibrated. It's reading almost perfect 1Os. As you can see, you might say, well, an 0.099, that's 1/1000th of a percentage off of a 1O. It's minute. It's very minute. We have the tightest tolerances in the nation when it comes to the control test. You're talking a 0.005 tolerance, plus or minus. You're never going to see it going up. Because if you start out with a 1.0 and you end up with a 1.04, that instrument's not reading properly. You're always going to see the solution depleting down. Hence, you're going to see probably an 0.95, 0.96 on the control test later on in the series.
Now, we've already established now, as a result of the Part 1 control tests, that the instrument's been recalibrated and it recognizes a 0.10 solution. We now move on to the Part 2 linearity test. Kevin, what's this all about?
All right. Just remember the first 2 tests that are performed by the instrument, the calibration and the control test, the sample is being introduced through the rear cuvette. That's where the simulator is hooked up to the instrument and it's drawing the vapor off of the simulator. Now with the linearity, we have 3 concentrations. And as you can see, we're going in sequential number. 203 was the calibration, 204 was the control, now 205 is the linearity test. We're taking 3 known concentrations, 0.04, 0.08, and 0.16. Why did they select 0.04? CDL. Why did they pick 08? It's per se violation in New Jersey. Why did they pick 1.6?
Because you connect it all, it's a straight dot, it's a straight line on the chart.
It's 0.08. Alabama actually tests 3.2, 0.32, and the reason they do 0.32 in Alabama,
Moonshine.
that's a party down there.
It's a party, right? It's
a party.
Alabama. What else is there to do there except drink and get married to your sister?
Right.
But you know what? After you get a divorce, you can still be brother and sister there, so it kind of works out.
But in New Jersey, we just check 3 points. Linearity, as you well know from your math class, you put 2 points on a chart, you draw a line through it, the instrument's reading linear. We picked, Dr. Bertel picked 3 points, 04, 08, and 1.6.
Kevin, here's the thing, though. I mean, I want everybody to visualize this, okay? Each one of these is a CU-34. Okay, here's 3 CU-34s. The trooper walks in with them, right?
Yeah, the trooper will have 3 that he brings that are assigned to him. And they're labeled. You'll see the same serial numbers every single time for the same concentration. 04, 08, 1.6. They heat it up for an hour. He NIST them, make sure they're heated properly, puts his NIST away. And then when it comes time for the linearity test, this is important because this was done specifically. He has the instrument sitting right here. And here's his 3 simulators. And the instrument's going to say, hook up to a 0.04. And what he does now, he uses the breath hose to test for the linearity. He takes his breath hose, hooks it up to the 0.04 in the front. Has his pump hose on there. He pushes the button. Now the sample is being delivered through the breath hose into the instrument. So now we can testify in court. We test the rear port during the calibration in the part 1. Now during the linearity, we're testing the breath hose to make sure the breath hose is working properly. This was done for a reason, because now we can show the court both methods of introducing the sample to the instrument are working properly. So he'll test the 04, take it off, test it again. 2 times he tests the 04. He has to receive acceptable readings. Then he'll say hook up to a 0.08. Same thing. Hooks up to the 08, presses the button, gets the sample, 08, and then he does the 1.6. But the linearity is done through the breath hose, so we can testify or tell the court we checked the breath hose, so we can say that the instrument is receiving the sample properly through the breath hose.
And you'll notice when you look at these, if you look at enough of them, you're always probably going to see 2 minutes between, because that process he was talking about takes a little longer, so there's a little more time.
The reason it takes a little longer is because he only has 1 black key temperature probe that he's using. It's in the 04 solution. Once he's done with the 04, he unplugs it, he pulls the probe out, dries it off with a paper towel, sticks it in the 08. It comes up to temperature within seconds because it's been heating for over an hour. Then he tests that. Then when he's done testing the 08, takes the probe out, sets that aside, dries it off, puts it in the 1.6. So now he's using the same probe for 3 different simulators. Only 1 probe, but he's using three simulators, but 1 probe for the linearity process. We're not trained as repairmen because they're all under warranty. They didn't want us as state police to do warranty work in New Jersey. And when the warranty expired, we recommended everybody take an additional 2 years out because the state troopers haven't been trained yet to repair these instruments.
Kevin, take a look at this Part 2 linearity test here. It's a core foundational document. What does this demonstrate? What does this tell you?
Well, it tells us that he checked 3 different concentrations. Here's his, the wet, here's the simulators, here's the serial numbers. All the information's here, and then the readings are here. Shows that the instrument's reading proper at 3 different concentrations. It's reading linear.
Looks like all these tests came within tolerance, right?
Yeah, all the tests are with tolerance. Gives you the time. The D stands for daylight saving. If it's standard time, there will be an S. Temperature of the simulator. And it tells you whether the test passed or not.
Got it. Here are the cards of the Trooper Snyder. And again, it's inconceivable to me that one of these would be expired. And if you get one that's expired, it's just going to be a discovery clerk issue under most circumstances.
Bob, can I ask
Yes, sir.
Kevin a question?
Sure.
And this is unrehearsed, so it's good. If during calibration, let's say in the linearity, one of the tests fails, do you start a whole new calibration procedure anew, or do you just run a second linearity test?
Good question. The answer is, if during the linearity, say the 04 or the 08 doesn't fall within tolerance, the test is going to be aborted. He would just redo a linearity test again. He wouldn't have to calibrate it and do a control test over. He would just do a new linearity. He would get 3 brand new bottles of solution, let them heat up for an hour, and then do the linearity test over again.
The sequential file numbers for all these documents should be sequential. If there's a gap, if you have 209, 210, and 212, something went wrong in there. something's going to raise an issue that you at least want to look at.
Right. That would show up also in the data downloads.
Downloads.
Right.
Now here, you just very simply, in the old days, you had to be a breathalyzer operator in order to get certified to operate the alcotest. This is the proof that Trooper Snyder was a breathalyzer operator. Then he became an alcotest operator back in 2006, and shortly thereafter became a breath test coordinator. Notice Zulima Farber signed his cards. I told you earlier that the last thing the trooper's going to do before he leaves to go to lunch and move on to his second department of the day, he's going to put new solution on the back of the instrument. Now, the new solution he puts on before he walks out the door is going to come from the police department's stash. Okay? Correct?
Correct.
It's going to go into their closet, wherever they store it, pour 500 milliliters into the CU34, get it all ready to go. And this is the evidence that he changed the solution on the back of the instrument. Okay? Everybody got that? Now, there's a very important legal issue here. Some of it is novel. I will bring it up to all of you so that you can raise it by way of advocacy if this comes up. And John, I'm going to need you to help me out with this a little bit, okay? There is no question, there should be no question in anybody's mind that this particular document is a core foundational document, at least for the 30 days or 25 drunk drivers following the time that the trooper walks out the door, okay? So if they arrest your idiot within the next 10 days or the next 25 drunk drivers, when the prosecutor's going through putting in all the core foundational documents, this is a document that's just got to go in, okay? Because the Supreme Court requires that the new standard solution, the most recent new standard solution report, be introduced in evidence, all right, during the 104 hearing. It's just black letter law. It's in the case. So for that short time period after the trooper has left, this is going to be a core foundational document. Thereafter, when the local cops start swapping out the solution every 30 days, whichever 25 drunk drivers, then their new solution report will become the core foundational document. Okay? Now I want to think outside the box here a little bit. Let's go back and look at the requirements that the court told us about in Chun. Here's the language. Device in proper working order and have been inspected according to procedure. Okay? Remember, and inspected according to procedure is one of the requirements. Okay? Everybody agree? Got to prove that by clear and convincing evidence. So supposing that, 3 months has gone by. Prosecutor introduces the local cops' new standard solution report and doesn't put this in evidence. Question: is this a core foundational document in the sense that it's necessary to go in to show that the instrument was inspected according to procedure? What do you think, John?
I think it is, because I think the procedure it's really a four-part procedure that the trooper does with a coordinator. Okay, they come in and they calibrate, they do control tests, they do linearities, and the last thing they do to put the instrument back in working order for the police officers to proceed is put this new solution in. If the trooper walked out after step 3 and didn't do this, the police department cannot continue on. It's not in good working order. They haven't followed the procedure. So I would say that this is evidence that they did all steps of the procedure. Without this, you don't know if they followed the procedure or not, or the state hasn't proved that they followed the procedure.
I want everybody to think about this. You're in trial, and the state does not introduce this document in evidence. All right? They introduce some other document that happened 3 months later, which is perfectly fine. I think you've got to argue that this is necessary to demonstrate that the instrument was inspected according to procedure. Okay? Now, what I'll show you is just from the language of the foundational documents we conclude need to be entered in evidence are few. Most recent calibration report prior to the defendant's test. Okay? This is from the state trooper with part 1 control test, part 2 linearity test, and credentials of the coordinator who performed the calibration. So technically, it doesn't mention anything about the cover sheet, but I guess that's the most recent calibration report, I guess. Part 1 is certainly there. Part 2 is there. Credentials, which the prosecutors always forget to introduce, is there. They don't talk about the new standard solution report as an additional piece of evidence to demonstrate that the instrument was inspected according to procedure. So this is a question of advocacy, since it's not specifically in the opinion, but I want to throw it out there so if you have this come up in a case, you can make the argument and see where you wind up.
Hey, Bob, can I say one about this? This should go out in discovery every time, too, on that case. This is the only way you can tell what's temperature probe is being used by the department. If you don't receive that document There's no way of knowing what certificate of accuracy temperature probe you should be receiving in discovery unless we physically go out to the department and look at the temperature probe and look at the serial number. That's why the coordinator writes on this solution change report the probe serial number. That's the only way we know what temperature probe is being used by that department.
So I guess the argument you're going to say is, look, there's no doubt that this is going to be a core foundational document if they test your guy within 30 days of the recalibration. By the same token, it may be a core foundational document regardless of when they test your guy because it's evidence that the instrument was inspected according to official procedure. Everybody got the argument? Again, this is advocacy. Stand up and make the argument, and you see where you go. Now, in our case, they changed the solution when October 23rd. The test prior to the defendant's, the change prior to the defendant's test occurred on January 20th, so about 4 months later. And what I'd like you to do, Kevin, could you take a second and just walk us through the steps that the local officer who's been tasked with the responsibility of swapping the solution, what he does physically
Sure.
to generate this report? Again, create a visualization. Think about the officer. He gets a call. Hey, it's time to swap out the solution. We got a control test failure last night, or it's 30 days, or 25 drunks, whatever it is. The local guy now has to swap out the solution. What does he do?
Yeah, the first thing he'll do, ladies and gentlemen, is unplug the simulator because they run silent, they run hot. So you got to unplug it. They actually have to disconnect it from the instrument. Pull it away from the instrument. Here's our instrument. It's connected back here at the cuvette here. The instrument stays in place. They disconnect the simulator and lay it on the side. Unscrew the head from the jar. They're going to lay the head down next to the simulator, next to the instrument on a paper towel. They take the jar with the solution to the kitchen or the bathroom and dump it out. It's no good. Rinse it out with water, dry it with a paper towel. You don't want any contamination. Once that's done, they bring it back to the instrument. They get a brand new bottle of 500 milliliter solution, introduce it into the jar. All those little components hanging down, they got to dry them off because you don't want contamination. So they dry them off. Now they got to seal it. The way they seal it, you got to lubricate the top of the jar. Stick their finger in the solution, lubricate the top of the jar, reconnect the head. Inside of that head, there's a rubber O-ring. They want to get that moist so they get a good seal. Once they have it connected, now they have to leak test that simulator to make sure they got a good seal. Put a mouthpiece on with a little plastic tube, hold their finger in front, they blow into it. As they're blowing into it, I was going to say put that simulator picture up there. As they're blowing into it, they're going to see bubbles. They're going to see bubbles. The bubbles should stop. If the bubbles don't stop, that indicates they don't have a good seal. They don't get a good seal, they got to disconnect it again, lubricate it, reconnect it. Once they got a good seal or get a good seal, they got to reconnect it back to the instrument with that neoprene hose, plug it back in, hook up the pump hose. If you ever see an error message, control gas supply error, they didn't hook it up. Or simulator temperature error, they didn't turn it back on. These are mistakes that the operator made changing the solution. And that's why we don't want everybody's fingers in the cookie jar, because then you're going to get more mistakes. The less fingers in there, the less mistakes we can have.
Now, let me ask you a question. Supposing you're hired as an expert, you personally.
Yes.
You call the officer as a witness, and you're going to have him go through step by step what he did, right? And you're there like a hawk listening to every word he says. Okay? Testified, he's done. Now you're going to testify in the defense case. And I would say to you, did you listen to what he had to say? Yeah. Did he do everything right? No. What did he do wrong? And then you're going to start talking.
Yeah, and let's see if he does everything right, I'll say he did everything right. But if he made mistakes, I would definitely point him out.
But it may be a function of the prosecutor not asking the right questions. That's the point I'm trying to make. Many of these prosecutors are not experienced in this stuff. They don't know what to ask. So technical questions like, did you dry it off with a paper towel? Did you leave it here? Did you leave it there? All the minutia that you have to do it right, you would pick up on this, right?
I would.
And you would testify ultimately at the end of the day. If the guy didn't, there was no testimony, the guy followed the right procedure, this is where you would be. As an advocate, when you're arguing whether or not this happened properly, you would say that the device had not been inspected according to official procedure. Why? Because the officer did not follow the official procedure in swapping out the solution. They have to prove that by clear and convincing evidence. Your argument is they haven't proved it by clear and convincing evidence because of not using a paper towel to dry off contaminants or whatever it may be.
And there's no checklist when they're doing this solution change. They have a manual they were issued, and it goes step by step in the manual, but there's no checklist that, all right, I unplugged the simulator, check. I disconnected it from the instrument, check. This is all that stuff that they're trained in the 1 day, in the 4 day, in the recertification, how to change the solution and what procedure to follow.
The key is that if you pick up on an error and you have evidence to suggest that the officer did not follow the official procedure, either A, because he just didn't, or B, because it was not elicited on direct examination, your pitch then, when you sum up, is again, the state did not prove that the instrument had been inspected according to official procedure. And the official procedure, of course, is what he would testify to.
These guys are going to miss a lot of stuff. They don't do it right. They don't do everything. I'm not saying they make major issues, but you're going to ask if they wiped it off. You think 11 o'clock at night on a Friday night, and this guy's ready to go off duty. You think he's sitting there wiping things down? Lucky if he dumps a solution out.
This is not a core foundational document, but you're going to get it in discovery. And it is the card of this guy, Stephen Simon. He is the one who changed the solution. If you see that his card is expired, you got to jump all over that. Why? Because it means that the solution change is going to be no good because he's suspended. That's number one. And number two, oh, by the way, they've got at least, or they have at most 30 days of problems that they're going to have to deal with because everything everything that happened after he swapped out the solution with his card expired,
Is it the prosecutor's obligation to inform the defense that his car was suspended and it could affect those 25
Oh, sure.
drivers?
It's exculpatory evidence. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, here is the 1.0 that's related to what the officer utilized. Notice he put in, when he swapped that solution he used from his own stash, 068035, and if you look, you'll get your discovery package. This is a core foundational document that the state police tested through gas chromatography, 068035. Show them the range on this, Kevin, just so they see what we're talking about.
Here's the range, the acceptable range, 0.117 to 0.125. And then I remember I said 0.121 is a perfect 1.0. This solution came in at a 1.213, a 1.215. That is tight solution, I'm telling you. You're not going to see any tighter solution than that.
All right.
Back when I was doing the breathalyzer, a big argument was, I've seen them down as low as a 1.17 to a 1.19, and you're still getting a 1.0. That's a little bit below a 1.0. So if your solution tests out lower than a 1.0, how come the instrument's reading a 1.0? And then the argument was the instrument's reading high, but that argument went out the window because the lots are a lot tighter now. They're all coming in real close.
Okay. Now here's the alcohol influence report. Again, this is a core foundational document. Very, very simple stuff. This stuff is inputted by the officer. Now, there's one quick thing I need you guys to understand. On the data downloads, I'm assuming that the data download will reflect the very first keystroke that the cop put in here. Maybe it would be the ticket number. All right, I guess that's the first thing they put in. I mean, from the time he presses the first key on the Alcatest to start inputting data, you're going to know what time of day that was.
Well, you can actually tell when he pushes this orange button, it's recorded in the digital download. So you can tell this test, the first test is at 20:01, which is 8:01 at night. You can tell by the digital download what time he pushed that button to start the breath test procedure via the digital download. And it's usually about 3 minutes prior to this time here. So he probably pushed that button at like 1958 to start the breath test procedure. And it all shows up in that digital download.
But if time is an issue, remember, you're going to be able to tell exactly when the officer got involved with this instrument for this transaction. It's not going to show up on here, but it will be on the data download. So now, just the first part is pedigree information. They input the summons number, because the guy's already going to get a summons. We know that. He got arrested out on the street. DOB, calculated as age, gender. You'll need to know that later on for the women who are over age of 60. 6'3", and weight have nothing to do with anything other than statistical information for the police. DL number, we've redacted that here. State, we've redacted. Here's the arresting officer, Officer Lee. There's his information. Notice that the officer who ran the instrument, Officer Everest, you saw his card before, different from Officer Lee. Officer Lee probably not eligible to operate the instrument. Arrest time recorded here is 19:05. S for standard time. What time is that in American time?
7.
7 o'clock at night, okay.
That's important too, ladies and gentlemen, because that's inputted by the operator, the time the arrest took place. There's a safeguard built in the instrument. The time here is 19:03. If he went to run the test at 19:15, the instrument would say, you can't do it. I don't see 20 minutes from the time of the arrest to the time of the test. It's a safeguard built in. They can't run a test any quicker than 20 minutes of the arrest time being entered.
Now, remember we talked about before about the distinction between the time of arrest versus the time of the stop. The state police have a protocol. This is only for the New Jersey State Police, and what is that?
The time of the arrest is the time of the stop.
Okay. Everybody got that? So when you see 1903, that is not necessarily the time that they put the cuffs on the guy. That's the time that the state police effected the motor vehicle stop. That is uniform throughout all New Jersey State Police drunk driving cases. For local departments, you get what you get. You're not sure whether it's the time of arrest or the time of the stop, which actually very frequently will work to your advantage, as you'll see.
And that's why it's important to get those CAD reports from the state police, because they usually say, I'll be 22, I'll be on a 23 with a 14. They're on their way back to the station. They're going to tell them what time they got out at the station. And they even put it in there, start my 20 minutes, and they'll give you the time. And if the time, say they started at 19:45 and they ran a breath test at 8 o'clock, they don't have their 20 minutes. They'll have 20 minutes from the time of the arrest, but they're not going to have 20 minutes back at the station to show that they had their 20 minutes.
So be mindful, this is going to be inputted by the officer. Should be in military time, but every once in a while you'll see that it's not, for reasons we'll get into in about 3 seconds. Here's the history. This is all coming from the instrument. Remember, there's a sequential file number. If you look over here, it's 249. This is the 249th function that this instrument has ever performed in its lifetime. Okay? So you can see, just to look at a little bit of history here, it has done...
that was the calibration, 203.
All right,
control
so
test.
at 203, it was sequential file number 203 when it got calibrated back on October the 23rd. That was the 4th time that ever happened in its lifetime. What's the, I can't see that far. What's
204.
That? What was that function?
That was the control test part 1.
All right, that was the 3rd time ever. Then the linearity test, the 3rd time ever. You'll always see this will be one more for the original calibration, because the original calibration occurs at the factory, so it's always one more than the troopers have got. And this instrument's had its solution changed. It happened at 247. That was the, how many times is that? 37th time it happened?
Looks like it.
In its life. Now notice, this is very interesting, guys. We arrested this guy on the...
January 27th.
January 27th. This is sequential file number 249, okay? Same as number here. They changed out the solution on the 20th of January, okay, 8 days earlier, and that was 247. They have exactly processed in that time period 2 drunk drivers. The word? Lazy. Lazy. Too much time in Dunkin' Donuts. Not enough time looking for drunk drivers in expensive cars. All right.
Bob, one thing about...
You guys wanted everybody to go to the public defender, or you want them to pick up some business?
One thing about the sequential file numbers, just to be aware, as Kevin said very early on, I think it'll go on and on and on, however many digits.
He said infinity, so that's a pretty big piece of that's a big piece of paper.
Infinity. However, if the motherboard goes, which I'm starting to see more of them now going. I don't know if you've been seeing.
I've seen them.
I've seen a lot of them. And when that goes, they may lose all the data, but on top of that, it starts off. They put a new motherboard in, it starts at 1 again, and that's something to look at, especially if you had a drunk in Evesham Township sometime around June.
Oh, that's a pleasure going there. Okay, so here's the bracketing we talked about before. We start off by making sure that there's no molecules of ethanol in the room air, because it would be ridiculous to try to purge a machine where there's molecules of ethanol in the air. You're just introducing contaminants in. There's no molecules of ethanol in the air. They purge out the machine, take a sample from the simulator. It comes out a 101 and a 10. That's hunky-dory. Get a sample from the live subject, who's a big guy, 6'3" and 295 pounds.
Slap a 65 on him.
Put a slap a 65 on him. Can you imagine fighting with a drunken guy with this size?
I'd pepper spray him.
Pepper spray.
And then shoot him.
You put
Let him go. It's easier.
That's one of the exceptions. He used a PR-24 on his head. All right. 175 and 175, very healthy readings. 2.8 liters of air over 5.4 seconds. Blow everything out of there with ambient air. Nothing left in. Second sample from the human subject. 174 and 171, very close. You can see these are going to be within tolerance. 3 liters of air, 5.9 seconds, no problem there. And then the instrument is purged out again. Another control test to get to bracket. What is that, a 9.6 or a 9.8? I can't
9.8 and a 9.9.
9.8, 9.9. Close enough. Bracket it out. Truncate the lowest reading. So find the lowest reading is a 171. Knock off the last letter. You get a 0.17 BAC. And here, signed by the officer. This has never happened in the history of New Jersey since 1776. Copy given to subject. Here's worksheet A, which, as I said before, will go away. You know, you can pretty much eyeball these things. It's something like this. You know, that's intolerance. Worksheet A has to go in even if there's going to be a plea. If it's a plea on a per se violation, you've got to introduce worksheet A. Obviously, it's a core foundational document for the state. that will go away with the next iteration of the software.
Just one little note, if you're not doing your own calculations, you should be, because a lot of times you'll get these printouts from the NCIC 2000 calculator that the state police have online, and that requires and even when you get the Bob Pinizzato sheet or whatever they give you, it requires somebody to put data in. And often the police officers will make mistakes. They'll put the wrong numbers in the wrong places, causes wrong results. Again, not intentionally, they're just doing it. Or especially, I know some towns will call to their dispatcher and have them do it, or central and have them do it, which I don't really understand. And sometimes those numbers get mixed up. So you always want to check, because they could have put the wrong numbers in.
Now, guys, let's get into the official procedure established by our Supreme Court in the case. Again, this was a result of John sitting in court for what seemed decades, trying this thing before Pat King every day, and then the court adopting in large part Judge King's reports, and that became the official procedure. Here we go. Again, this comes right from the opinion. There's the pinpoint site. Operators must wait 20 minutes before collecting a sample to avoid overestimating readings due to residual effects of mouth alcohol. Software is programmed to prohibit the operation of the device before the passage of 20 minutes, which Kevin just told you. Moreover, the operator must observe the test subject for the required 20-minute period of time to ensure that no alcohol has entered his mouth while he's awaiting the start of the testing sequence. In addition, remember we talked about this before, if he swallows anything, or regurgitates, or if he's got chewing gum or tobacco in the mouth, the operator is required to begin counting the 20-minute period anew. If they swallow chewing gum or whatever it is, start it anew. The cops never do that. Assuming the results of the control test are within the parameters, the instrument prompts the operator through a message on the LED to collect a breath sample. Operator attaches a new disposable mouthpiece. Remember, they got to give a new mouthpiece on every single test. Kevin told you that before. Remove cell phones and portable electronic devices from the testing area. Operator is required to read the following to the subject, and we talked about this. This has to be posted. Remember, before every test, they have to read this. Very important, especially in the refusal context, because they might have read it the first time and then they didn't read it the second time. Arrestee then provides a sample, which is measured by the EC and the IR. All right. Now, on the 20 minutes, Gorvix is really not relevant anymore. Filson is the main case, and in Filson, a law division case written by Judge Osterer, who's now in the appellate division, standing for the proposition that in this case, the police really couldn't tell. They could never prove the 20 minutes. The best I could think they could actually prove to the satisfaction of everybody that they waited 18 minutes. Rivera says that the calculations on worksheet A have to be done to four decimal places. Riemann, this is really kind of reinforces what the court said in Chun, that the officer must testify. You can't have a substitute coming in. The officer who ran the test has to testify as an indispensable witness. We talked about tissio for a reasonable period of time. We've talked about mouthpieces, cell phones, tongue devices. Blank fields, very quickly, if you see any blank fields, not stuff that's inputted, but a blank field on the alcohol influence report.
What they're really looking at is functions that are done by the machine, stored in the machine. If it's blank, that's a big problem. Erroneous information can be a problem anywhere. As Kevin just alluded to, sometimes for weird reasons that nobody can explain, you'll get, instead of the officer's name, you'll get all Y's or you'll get all Z's. And those things happen. It's a glitch, it's a software glitch. But it's intermittent. They've never been able to really identify why a lot of those things happen. So if you see that, you got a great argument. Something's not working right here. This is not in good working order if it's printing out all Z's.
But in Judge King's report, which was adopted by the Supreme Court, if there are blank fields, or a field that doesn't it has arithmetic data, alphanumeric data instead of all numeric data, something like that, the alcohol influence report is supposed to be inadmissible. Okay. That's not in the Chun decision. That's in the Judge King's report, which was adopted by the Supreme Court as modified, and that part was not modified. All right. Now, what I'd like to do, guys, is to take a second here and go through a police report. And this is this is in your materials. Just take 3 minutes to go through this. There's nothing changed on this report. This is a typical run-of-the-mill minor accident drunk driving report. Experience curve of prosecutors and police in trying contested Alcatraz cases is extremely low. Very few prosecutors have tried one at all. You may have one or two that have started it, and the case kind of goes el foldo in the middle. Police officers who have been subject to the crucible of direct and, most importantly, cross-examination, many, many, many fewer. Okay? So this, as a defense attorney, is a tremendous advantage for you because you're dealing with an adversary who is not as well prepared or knowledgeable as you are. That's number one. But number two, even more importantly, from the prosecutor's perspective, if you're going to do this right, it takes a long time to get your witness ready. You've got to work with your officer, get him ready to authenticate all these documents so he can testify to the judge what they mean, notwithstanding the fact that the rules of evidence don't apply, that he's going to cover all the things he has to cover in terms of these conditions of admissibility and be able to withstand cross-examination. It takes time to do that, and many prosecutors, quite frankly, don't have the time or the inclination, especially if they're part-timers and they have, private practices, maybe paid a little bit of money, and they just don't have the wherewithal to do it. I don't mean this is a knock on the prosecutors. It's just the reality of municipal court practice and the system that we have set up. You can utilize the inexperience of the prosecutor, the inexperience of the officer, as well as the dearth of time available to prep witnesses for these types of cases to your advantage when you're trying these things. Take a look at this report. Now, the date that this accident happened was April the something. What's that say, Johnny?
April 3rd.
April 3rd. Time of day?
2041, which is 8:41 p.m.
All right. Let me see if I can read this thing. Here's the crash right here. D1 stated he was traveling on Whitehorse Hamilton Square Road when a deer jumped out in front of his vehicle. D1 said he swerved to avoid the Bambi, but impacted a tree. More proof that in the battle between car and tree in New Jersey, the never-ending battle, I might add, tree always wins. Based upon my investigation of the physical evidence, I find D1 at fault in the crash. Subsequently, D1 was arrested for driving while intoxicated. It was the impairment by D1 that caused the crash, not the deer. All right. Now, here's what I want you guys to do. When you're analyzing these discovery documents from the police, every time you see a reference to a time of day, write it down on a piece of paper. Okay? Write it down. Keep track of it because you're going to find that these times very often will not add up, and you'll have a tremendous amount of fun when you cross-examine the officer. Let's see what this says. Here's the drinking driving report. I was detailed to Whitehorse Hamilton Square Road for a report of an MV crash. When I arrived, I observed a Chevy Monte Carlo with heavy front-end damage. There were several people standing around the scene, and I asked who the operator of the vehicle was. Operator then raised his hand while he was on a cell phone. Now, this should just jump off the page and slap you in the face so hard that it knocks a tooth out. You're going to see the word cell phone, and you're going to say, hey, I'm in business here. What happened to the cell phone? Let's see what the cop says. And you'll see in this case, he doesn't say anything. I then asked him to end his call so I could continue the investigation. Operator identified himself as Mr. David. He began telling me how the crash occurred. At that point, I could smell the strong odor of an alcoholic beverage coming from his breath along with his red and watery eyes. I then asked if he had been driving or drinking. He said, yep. He said he had 6 beers. And during the conversation, his speech was slurred. I took him to the front of my vehicle to conduct roadside tests. I'm going to skip all this because we're not talking about under the influence cases. So he gets arrested. He was calm during the trip to headquarters. At headquarters, I received information from the arrest report from David. I then read paragraph 36 of the DWI report. I then entered his information in the Alcotest 7110 MK3C, C for communication. After the first attempt, David provided me with 2 good samples. The results were .18. That's it. That's it. That's the whole report. Can you imagine the fun you're going to have with this officer? Can you imagine the problems that the prosecutor's going to have trying to get all the information related to the 20-minute observation, the mouthpieces, whether he vomited or anything like that? Especially if the case is being tried 3 or 4 months down the line where the officer didn't make any notes of what was happening. But I digress. This is the arrest report. Let's see what's on here. They arrested the guy. Any times on here?
Yeah, there is 21:20 hours.
Uh-oh. What's that mean?
It's 9:20 hours. That's 40 minutes after the first one.
Okay, so he actually his arrest time changes now.
He got arrested twice.
He got arrested twice in the same night. All right, the above date, the party was arrested for driving intoxicated, which resulted from a motor vehicle crash, transported headquarters and released, potential warning liability issued, and those are the summonses, okay? Again, this is on April the 3rd of 2010.
Now, one of the reasons on that accident report, what they were probably going from, and you'll see in the CAD report later, they're going from the time the accident was reported. So somebody called up, hey, some guy just hit a tree out here. That was the time of the accident. So, but they use that as time as arrest. You'll see they interchange them back and forth.
Here's the alcohol influence report. Now, according to this, they administered the first test to him at 8, what time?
At 2049, well, first has 2049, 8:49 at night.
But they arrested him at 9:20 in the morning. What's that all about?
That's well, what happened here? This is because of daylight savings time. The instrument's not yet modified for the new daylight savings time. Back in 2005, there's an executive order by the president moving daylight savings time. Was a fix received by the state, a patch, but because of all litigation, the patch was never implemented. So it's sitting on Dr. Baum's desk, still waiting for the president to change it back. Anyway, what happens is the police officer comes in and he goes to type in 2120. And he starts typing in 2120, and the alco test is saying, hey, wait a second, it's only 2047. That hasn't happened yet. And police officers want to get it to work, so they want to pound the square peg into the round hole, no matter how it's going to get there one way or the other, because they're going to get it there. So they just decide to change the time to 9:20, which is 9:20 a.m. Now it takes it, because the alco test is very happy. It's got more than 20 minutes. You know, it's got 12 hours and 20 minutes. So it's real happy. But and you'll see sometimes I've seen them change the date. I've seen them change the year. I've seen them change everything on it because they want to get that in there. They're told they got to force it in, and they do.
But you can see no matter which time you look, we've got times here where they're going to make it's going to be impossible for them to account for the 20-minute observation period. All right, now you can see the first test was bad because he only had 1.4 liters of air as opposed to 1.15. The other two were okay. What is this guy, 0.18? Oh, he's a healthy drunk. All right. Now, imagine yourself going through this with the officer. Okay, now, officer, after you were done testing this guy, did you immediately take the results of that test and run them through some type of computer to make sure that they were in tolerance? Yes, I did. Okay. Officer, I'm going to ask you to take a look at S6 for identification. Do you recognize that? I sure do. And is that the result you got back to show that these readings were in tolerance? Yep. And you did this, of course, while the defendant was still in custody, so that if the results were out of tolerance, you could give him a new test right away. Right, officer? Yep. Officer, is there a time recorded on this document? Yes. What is that time? 22:29 hours. Okay, thank you, officer. Okay. Yeah, this is the potential warning liability.
He's read them at 21:20 hours. The arrest date is 21:20. That's consistent.
All right. And they let him go at 22:20?
Yep.
So he was already gone when they let him go. All right, even though they ran this other thing here. Here's the driving while impaired. Is there any times on this one?
Yeah, 21.
21:20.
20.
All right. Oh. Look at this, a drinking driving report. And officer, did you fill this out yourself? Yes, I did. And anybody have an opportunity to edit your work? No. Take a good look at it, officer. Does this look like the way it was originally submitted? Yes, it does. Officer, I see there's a box on here, box number, whatever that is. What does it say? Day of the week? What does it say the day of the week there, officer? Saturday. Who wrote that in there, officer? I did. Next box over. It says violation date. Is there something written there? Yes. What is it? April the 3rd. Who wrote that in there, officer? I did. Also, next to that, there's a time of day. Is there some numbers there? Yes, officer. Who wrote that in there? I did. And what's the time there, officer? 8:41. Now, officer, I want you to look at that very carefully. Take a good look. Does it appear to you, officer, that someone has gone in there and changed a 9 to an 8? Does it look that way to you, officer? Okay. And then he's going to say whatever he's going to say. Who cares? It doesn't matter at this point. They're not going to be able to demonstrate the 20 minutes as a result of this mess. Okay? And if the judge thinks that they were fudging the numbers here, how's he going to believe it by clear and convincing evidence? See what I'm saying? All right. You guys think somebody messed with this number? You think he changed a 9 to an 8? All right. What about this CAD here, Johnny? What's
the
that say?
CAD here shows that they arrived at headquarters at 21:25. It looks like so. That again, they arrived. If you go by the AIR, they arrived at.
They tested him before they brought him to the police station,
yeah.
Basically. All right. Well, this is a very efficient police department. Okay. Look, I have to tell you something, guys. I don't mean to make fun of anybody. This is why we redacted all this stuff. But this is not atypical. You find this over and over and over again. Time is usually going to be your best friend in terms of defending these cases, because the police don't, they're just not thinking about these things. So few of the cases wind up going to trial, and the police have other things on their minds. And I'll tell you something else. It just is a matter of a practice pointer. You may get a report that is absolutely perfect. I mean, it talks about every conceivable thing you could have in one of these cases. Mouthpieces and 20 minutes, and just every single thing is accounted for, okay? My advice to you when you get a report like that is go back in your discovery, ask for supplemental discovery, and you want the last 4 or 5 reports that the trooper did or the officer did. Usually it's going to be a local officer. And you're going to see that this is nothing more than a cut and paste job. They have exactly the same language in every report. All they've done is, you hope, or they hope, substituted out the name of the prior defendant and plopped your guy's name in. You've really got to get that because it's tremendous fodder for cross-examination when they get confronted with their own reports, their own previous reports, to see that it's just the same thing over and over and over and over again. They're just cutting and pasting their reports. So, I mean, if it looks like it's too good to be true, too professional, too well done, it is. Okay? All right. Now, the bottom line out of all this stuff we've talked about tonight, and I hope you guys will kind of take this away with you, is this. That don't be afraid to try these cases, all right? Utilize your materials that you got here tonight as a tool, all right? Take it with you to court. If you can persuade the prosecutor pre-trial that there's a problem with the readings, they're not going to go into evidence, great. But don't be afraid to try them because you're going to find that you'll have a tremendous advantage over your adversaries based upon your training tonight, the materials, and the lack of training and experience on the other side. Again, it's not a knock against these individuals as professionals. It's just the reality of the situation.